welcome to the Actual Tech Media MegaCast. My name is Jess, and I am excited to be here with you all today. But before we jump into our content, I have some basic information to cover with you. Let's kick off our day here today by taking a quick tour of your audience console. And we're going to start with the questions window. Now, if you haven't already said hi, there is a whole audience of cool humans out there, so reach out and give a wave to the other members of the Actual Tech Media community. Also, keep in mind that if you have any tech issues today, a browser refresh is going to fix just about anything. But if those tech gremlins are clinging on, no problem. Just throw a comment in the question section and our crew will be there to help. We also want this to be an informative webinar for you. So throughout today's MegaCast, we hope you'll get engaged and ask all of your burning questions. Not only will we have team members responding to you over live chat, we will also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of our presentations. And if we do not get to your question during the webinar, don't worry, because the awesome experts that we have here with us today will be following up with you after we wrap. All right, next up on our tour, there are going to be lots of cool aha moments in the MegaCast today, and if you want to share those with your community, we've made it nice and easy for you. You can use the Twitter button right there in your audience console, and the hashtag for today's MegaCast will automatically get added to your post. And our last stop on this guided tour, be sure to check out the Handouts tab for some resources and takeaways from our speakers here today. We have an info pack collection of solution briefs, white papers, data sheets, free trials, ebooks, upcoming webinars, and more. So many great resources, so be sure to go explore. And if that wasn't enough fun, we also have some exciting prizes we will be giving away throughout the MegaCast today. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about those later on, but a few quick reminders for you all. You do need to be in attendance here live at the webinar in order to qualify to win a prize, and we will follow up with all winners after we wrap the MegaCast today. Now, all winners must submit an IRS Form W-9 to Actual Tech Media, and all winners must meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. Now, hey, if you're not sure what those are, no problem. You can find the full T's and C's in that Handouts tab. Again, just click into the Handouts section, scroll down to the bottom, and you'll find the full T's and C's waiting for you there. Now, the absolute most important thing to remember here today is that we love getting all your insightful questions during these live webinars. In fact, we love it so much that we have a special additional prize for all you inquisitive folks out there. In today's MegaCast, we will be giving away a prize for the best question asked in each of our sessions. Now, the expert speakers and teams will review all the questions asked after the webinar, which means that even if your question does not get read out in a live session, there is still a chance to win. If you are a lucky winner here today and would like to donate the value of your prize, we have several wonderful organizations that we partner with. So let us know when we follow up about winning, and we will get that rolling for you. Again, we are so happy to have you all here with us live at the MegaCast today, and we want to keep that good feeling going. So let's connect on social. Reach out and connect with Actual Tech Media on Twitter and LinkedIn. We have lots of great content, and we always want to hear from you. Now, if you're looking for more awesome content right away after we wrap, you want to jump right in, make sure that you subscribe to the Actual Tech Media channel on YouTube. Another fun way to win a prize and to grow this awesome community is to refer an industry friend or coworker to the Actual Tech Media webinar series. Now, you're going to find a link to do that right there in that Handouts tab, and you will also be automatically redirected after we wrap today. Now, both you and your coworker, your friend, could win a prize, and we actually hold those drawings every month. So be sure you refer somebody awesome before you head out today. It could quite literally be a win-win situation. Next, we have a cool opportunity for the decision makers out there to get connected with new and emerging tech and innovative vendors. Here's how it works. All you need to do is click on the link in your Handouts tab and fill out the application. Then the Actual Tech crew will match you with some vendors that we think you should be chatting with based on your needs. There will also be fun opportunities that you can choose to join in, like surveys or test running new solutions, extended demos, and so on. You'll get some chances to win extra prizes, you'll chat with great people, and you will learn about the hottest new trends in tech. So be sure to apply, or hey, send that link to a decision maker in your team. Now, I want to take a quick minute here to remind you about one of my favorite resources, and that is ransomware.org. You can find everything you need to know about ransomware, how to prepare, how to prevent and recover. The site is jam-packed with information, helpful tips, checklists, strategic approaches, case studies, everything you need in one place. So wherever you are in your ransomware preparedness journey, there is something for you at ransomware.org. So go check it out and start exploring. All right, I have one more exciting resource I have to tell you about today, and that is the Gorilla Guide Book Club. It's going to give you access to free enterprise IT books authored by top industry experts, so you can stay up to date on trending enterprise technology. And yes, these books are going to work on your Kindle, your mobile device, and they are completely free, super easy. You can download these awesome resources at gorilla.guide, and there's a link for you in the handouts tab as well. Okay, well, we've covered a lot of important things already, and I don't know about you all, but I am excited to dive in. So let's get rolling.
All right, thanks so much, Jess. Really appreciate that. A great introduction, great way to kick off the event. Today's MegaCast, the title is Zero Trust Security, Truth versus Fiction. The event is brought to you in partnership thanks to our wonderful friends from StrongDM, Rubric, Gigamon, Axis, CrowdStrike, and CyberArk. All right, before we get started, I should mention just a couple things. First off, my name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'll be serving as one of your moderators today. We'll also be joined by, you already met, Jess Steinbach, as well as Mr. Scott Becker and Keith Ward. Now, this is a MegaCast, so I like to say we have a mega lineup of prizes, and the MegaCast today is no different. We've got 4 Apple iPhone 14 Plus phones to give out today in your choice of color. I wish I had one of these phones myself, but 4 of you will be winning them on the MegaCast today. And then we'll also be giving out Amazon $300 gift cards roughly every 30 minutes after each of our 6 presentations on the MegaCast. So that's, let's see, $1,800 in Amazon gift cards being given out today on the MegaCast. And then in addition to that, we even have our best question, Amazon $50 gift cards for each of the 6 Q&A sessions on the event today. So keep those in mind. Of course, you must be live in attendance to qualify. All right, so with that, it's now time to kick off our keynote presentation. I'm going to hand it now over to Jess Steinbach and Keith Ward.
All right, Keith, we are here and we are going to chat a little bit about zero trust, true, false. We're going to test the audience zero trust IQ. You ready to help us out with that today?
Absolutely, Jess.
Awesome. Well, I have a feeling that we have a lot of extremely high ZT IQs out there. So we're going to kick things off with just a test run. We want to get everybody limbered up and ready to participate. So here's our first question for you all. Are you ready? Our very first question is, summer is the best season. Bring on the sunshine. True, false, team. What do you guys think? What do you think, Keith?
False.
What?
Sorry, I'm gonna. Oh, see that? I don't know anything. I'm a fall kind of guy, but yeah,
okay. So
I didn't study hard enough for this.
Full disclosure, I made this slide deck. I put this in here, and the reason I think summer is the best is because I like the sunshine. I like being able to walk around outside. I live in a very cold climate, and it's very nice to go outside when the air doesn't hurt my face. And I can feel everyone in Arizona and Texas disagreeing with me right now. So apologize to all of you, but I'm going to go with true on this one. All right. So
Fair enough.
Getting things rolling here. Let's start with this one. Keith, zero trust is a solution or product. True or false, my friend?
That would be false, Jess. There you go. I got that one. So yeah, zero trust is much more of a mindset. Now, you can use products, you can buy products that will absolutely help you implement zero trust, but it is not something that you buy. It is a way you do security nowadays. You assume everything is open to compromise and everything is out to get you, basically, unless proven otherwise, which is why this is false.
I love that. I think that is such an important reminder. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the ramifications that this has in just a moment when people misinterpret this one. But really in particular, I think it's important to differentiate between solutions and products that support zero trust, but are not equal to zero trust. They're part of that approach, that strategy, that mindset. And we're going to be digging into that a little bit today. And that brings us to our very next question here for you, Keith. Zero trust is too expensive to implement. Keith, what do you think? True or false?
That would be false.
Okay, bump it. Everyone get your answers in. What do you think? And false.
Yes. There you go. Now I'm getting warmed up, right? I'm starting to get the answers right for a change. All right. So we have to kind of put this in context, though, Jess. Zero trust can be expensive parts of it. There's tools you can buy. There are solutions, although, as we just discussed, that is part of the overall mindset. But even though whatever you spend on zero trust, whatever you spend, you have to weigh that cost against the outcome of not having zero trust, right? So having data stolen, having a ransomware compromise, right? Having a ransomware attack that involves exfiltration. So you get blackmailed, or they're going to publicly release your PII, your privately identifiable information. So the cost of not doing zero trust, Jess, is always going to be greater than the cost of putting it in place. Even though you may have to add new resources, you may have to have new tools to fully deploy your model. You have to think that in the end, this is going to save you a lot of money, not just the cost of stuff, but the cost of reputational damage, right? You do not want your company to be the one that's in the news, right, in the next week or the next month or the next year as the one that got hit, because that kind of reputation may be impossible to regain.
I think you just gave everyone out there in the audience a few key ROI points to bring up if they're having to make this argument to a leadership team or a decision maker in their organization and needing to really justify some of these new solutions. And also, hopefully, we're looking at, there are some opportunities to kind of simplify, and we're going to talk about this a little bit throughout the day today too, that sometimes these things can feel really expensive, but if you're, using the approach in the right way for your organization, it may not actually be as expensive, as expansive as you're thinking that it might be.
And you can also deploy it slowly. Remember, you don't have to have everything in place at once. You can add a piece at a time as you can afford it. So it's not something that you have to fully deploy just in one big smash, one huge amount of equipment you have to buy. You can kind of piecemeal and work your way up, adding layer upon layer of defense.
I love that point, Keith. That is such a great point for the audience out there. That's someone, especially that might be feeling a little overwhelmed. Okay, Keith, the 3 guiding principles of zero trust are least privilege access, explicit verification, and assume breach. Is that true or false?
This is true, Jess.
Nailed it.
Yeah. And I would say this is true with the caveat that these are generally accepted principles. This is not a hard defined field with definite boundaries. Okay. But in general, this is what we're talking about. So least privilege access. Instead of taking away privileges from a power user, for example, you start with everyone having no access. You add this stuff that they need when they need it, not at once, when it becomes necessary to have. Really important point here, the least privileged access, I think. Explicit verification, the identity, you need to know who's getting this access. The identity has to be authenticated beforehand, so the right people who you're giving this least privilege to are not out to hurt you, are not out to compromise your network. So don't trust, but verify anyway. Kind of the opposite of what President Reagan said way back when, right? The old trust but verify. Well, flip that on its head. Don't trust and verify anyway. And I would say the third thing here is the assumed breach. you hear vendors often say it's not a matter of if but when. Well, that's correct nowadays, Jess. You know, the attacks, the numbers are staggering. I've seen statistics as high as 85 and 90% of companies have suffered some sort of a cyber attack in the last year. Assume it's going to happen. That's the mindset you need. I am open to compromise my network. No matter how secure I think I am, I'm not secure enough. Go in with that mindset and you will take the necessary precautions.
I do think that's so important, because boy, wouldn't it be nice if we all had, the one castle wall, and we could sit behind that castle wall feeling nice and safe. But, it is such an important mindset shift. And Keith, that kind of brings us to our last question for everyone out there. And for anyone out there that is coming into this conversation thinking, yeah, I've looked into zero trust and I'm already feeling overwhelmed. And I think for a lot of people out there, it does feel too overwhelming, too big, too much, or, they feel like it's, we talked earlier about cost. It's too expensive. And so I think there are a lot of people out there that are feeling like it's too complicated. I'm going to answer this one, and then I'm going to ask you for a little clarification. So this is false. It is not too complicated. And Keith, you gave us one step or one way that we could look at this a little bit earlier. You said, take one piece at a time. I'm wondering, Keith, if I can ask you to tell me why you think this feels so overwhelming, why it feels complicated, and if you have any pointers for the audience out there on how to move past that feeling.
So I think, Jess, you're right. And I think one of the things that happens is people have the mindset that you have to rip and replace, right? Mm-hmm. Lift and shift, it's sometimes called. You don't have to do that. Okay, starting the framework can certainly appear daunting if you feel like you have to blow everything up, right? And then rebuild from scratch. There's stuff in your network you probably have right now that you can leverage. Then you add tools as necessary. One of the things to really consider strongly, if it feels like it's too overwhelming, as you mentioned, is think about a managed service provider. Bring in a partner who's knowledgeable of how to do this. There's probably a lot that you already have around that they can leverage or that you may not have known how to use properly. So bring on someone else. If you feel like you don't have the time or expertise, there's plenty of vendors out there ready to help you. So consider that as an early option when you're looking at implementing zero trust. Also, when you're looking at different solutions as part of your zero trust mindset, think about zero pane of glass. Everybody knows that buzzword, but there's so much to follow. There's so much to be aware of, so many alerts. That single pane of glass, that simple management paradigm is something that will help you grasp it and keep a handle on what can easily feel just too daunting to even get started.
Well, I think that's great. And you gave us an awesome segue there, Keith, because you mentioned, chatting with a few different vendors, and we've got some incredible folks here with us today that are really going to help you take those first steps and make sure that you're able to take action. So our final question from Keith and I to all of you out there, and Keith, I'll ask you to answer on behalf of our audience. Everyone out there today is taking a great first step just by attending here today. What do you think, Keith?
Let me think. That's a real... No, I'm just kidding. That is obviously true. TRUE.
That is true. And as we say all the time in these webinars, everything starts with these conversations, being able to share information together, being able to share our experiences together, being able to learn from one another is our absolute best tool in our tool chest. So a big high five to all of you out there. And Keith, with that, I think it's time for us to jump in. Should we get started?
Absolutely. Let's go, Jess.
All right.
All right. Great conversation. Thank you so much, Keith and Jess. I learned a lot. I know the audience did as well. And we had tons of folks out there in the audience playing along, responding true or false in the questions pane. Thank you, everyone who played along with the fun there. I just brought up a poll question for everyone in the audience. The question on the screen is, what's your time frame for really taking action on zero trust solutions? Is it in the next 6 months, meaning pretty immediate, 6 to 12 months, 12 to 24, or maybe you're not quite sure yet? We do want to get your quick feedback on this question because we are about to bring in our first expert presenter on today's Zero Trust, Truth versus Fiction MegaCast. So respond there to the poll, and we'll move on here in just a moment. All right. Thank you, everyone who responded. We do appreciate your feedback. And with that, it's time to kick it off with our first expert presenter on the MegaCast. Welcome to Mr. Justin McCarthy, co-founder and CTO of StrongDM. Justin, I'll hand it off to you. Take it away.
My name is Justin, and I'm one of the co-founders and the original author of our product here at StrongDM. And today, I'm going to share a few thoughts on applying zero trust architecture in 2023 and beyond. At StrongDM, as a company and as a product team, we care, of course, deeply about access. And we care about access that begins with identity. We care about access that embraces zero trust principles, and most of all, we care about access that is easy to use. To make access easy to use, our team dives deep into how applications authenticate and authorize. And therefore, much of our day-to-day involves some pretty deep tech, working with authentication standards like OpenID Connect and WebAuthn, as well as SAML and SCIM. And at an even lower level, working with wire protocols and packet formats and public key infrastructure and cryptography. It's definitely deep tech and it's difficult stuff. And we all love working on the problem. But all that said, this particular talk is not a deep tech talk. This is a talk, as Dominic alluded to, featuring cake. Specifically, this unicorn cake you see here. And today, we're going to let this unicorn cake represent a vision. So this cake here is our hope. And this cake is our idealized form of a zero trust architecture. And our cake metaphor here is decorated so beautifully that if you were the baker, you'd want to show your family and you'd want to show your friends. You'd want everyone to know about it. So here's a question. Why aren't our social feeds filled with these photo brags of zero trust unicorn cakes? And so you fans out there of the Netflix baking show Nailed It might remember that reality often doesn't match expectations. And just a fun, quick aside for us late in 2022 here, to make sure we didn't run afoul of any licensing restrictions, this is not actually a cake fail from the famous Netflix show, but is instead the AI DALL-E 2's best rendering of the prompt, rainbow unicorn cake fail. And I think it did a great job there. Look at that. Okay, so why is the recipe for zero trust access so difficult to nail? Let's think about it. We know what we want to achieve. We want to be able to start with identity. We want to be able to continuously authorize access. And we want to be able to monitor and audit activity. But when your web-based workloads are converged into a single sign-on provider like Ping, Okta, or Microsoft Entra, just use the SSO is a valid answer to a ton of your access needs. But the story gets a little more complicated when your data scientists, DevOps, software engineers, and other tech staff need direct access to that infrastructure and to those databases. In that case, authentication standards like SAML, OIDC, and WebAuthn aren't enough. Your Oracle database just does not care whether you have a cookie set in your web browser, and neither does your Kubernetes cluster. We conducted a survey earlier this year that pretty clearly demonstrated when it comes to infrastructure access, shared credentials and shadow IT are still commonplace. You'll recognize a lot of these survey responses because we've all been seeing them for years. And because a core focus for us at StrongDM is ease of use, we asked specifically about friction and productivity and found that users that need infrastructure access to do their jobs are frustrated, reporting both access-related work interruptions and long wait times to receive that access. At StrongDM, we've created a very simple recipe for zero trust access. We've created a recipe that converges all of these diverse systems into a single workflow. Our workflow unifies your existing web-based SSO experience with the privileged direct infrastructure access that your developers need. And once again, when your data scientists, engineers, and other tech staff need that direct access to databases and infrastructure, authentication standards like SAML and OIDC and WebAuthn even, they're just not enough. You need a product that speaks Oracle directly in its native language. You need a product that can handle Kubernetes certificates, Active Directory credentials, and SSH keys in a unified, automated, and auditable workflow. Okay, so here we are at the segment of the talk where we're actually going to look at how this behaves and how this is implemented within StrongDM. So we're going to do a quick demo of how StrongDM acts as the bridge between your identity provider, whether it's Okta, Active Directory, or any other IDP, and your most sensitive infrastructure. Let's take a look. We begin by identifying ourselves. And of course, this is happening through a delegation to a single sign-on provider. If we were to initiate a login, it's going to look like this. So from my workstation, I'm logging in here. Multi-factor is going to be invoked according to whichever multi-factor is configured in my identity provider of choice. I'm just going to interact with my phone here to verify that I'm the one attempting to log in. Do that one more time. Okay, and as that data scientist, as that engineer, as that member of the DevOps team, now from the point of view of my workstation, without invoking a VPN, without invoking any other web console, I have direct access to all of these technical resource types directly from my desktop. I don't have to worry about networking. I don't have to worry about further authentication or authorization. And in fact, I don't even know which credentials are in use because the StrongDM product is handling all of that on my behalf. If I were to interact, for example, with a Postgres database, I don't need to worry about which data center this is in, which public cloud service provider, or in fact, what credential, username, or role might be in use, because this has already been determined for me as an end user according to my role as configured in Okta. So let's jump from the end user's experience over to the administrator side. And what we're going to look at is how that authorization is conveyed from the identity provider through to that user on their workstation. So we're going to begin over here in the identity provider in Okta in this case. And you can see that this user is a member of several groups, including this Okta engineering group right here, okay? That engineering group is synchronized over to the StrongDM product. What you'll see here is the screen on the right is actually Okta. So if we were to, for example, remove Justin from this engineering group. What you'll notice on the left-hand side of the screen is that within StrongDM, the user Justin no longer has any roles. And on my workstation, I no longer have access to any resources. Going the other way, we're going to add Justin back to this engineering group. That's going to appear within the StrongDM product immediately, and it's immediately going to be reflected down to the workstation. This is how authorization can be unified from your identity provider, can be blended with all the other authorization cases that you have, but can then convey that authorization through these really low-level infrastructure, technology-specific endpoints and resources that your tech staff need to do their jobs. Let's take a look at a few of the other ways we might access technical resources. From the command line, there are many systems that we might connect to using a shell. So let's take a simple example of an SSH connection here. I'm just going to provide the name of the resource that I intend to access. And then StrongDM is again figuring out the network routing, all of the credentialing, as well as all the auditing, which we'll look at in a minute. So under this same authentication that I performed with Okta, we've now looked at interactions with databases, SSH connections to, let's say, a generic Linux box. Let's look at one more technology type here, which is Windows Remote Desktop. So in this case, I have a single remote desktop instance. I'm going to click on it, indicating my intent to connect. And then I'm just going to use a native Windows Remote Desktop client to connect in exactly the way I normally would. And then I'm off to the races using Windows as I normally would. Let's disconnect. Okay, so just to review, we've talked about authenticating using our identity provider. We've talked about authorizing and how we can unify that authorization with the groups and roles that are present in our identity provider. Let's talk about that visibility and auditing when it comes time to perform any kind of an exploration of what's been happening, maybe in a compliance scenario or a forensic scenario. So back over to the StrongDM administrative interface. We can explore, obviously, user activities such as authentication, but then what StrongDM is able to provide is a much deeper level of audit. In this case, what you're seeing is the database connections and database queries that are actually being transmitted into this database in real time. We have the same capability, of course, for any of those SSH sessions that we're conducting. And then finally, for those Windows Remote Desktop sessions that are really every pixel, every mouse movement, we're going to be able to look at that in retrospect and really understand what happened during that session. Back to authorization for a moment. There are many cases where the access that is conveyed through your role in the organization may not be enough to accomplish a specific task, or according to how you prefer to assign access within your organization, you might prefer to have fewer standing privileges or maybe even close to zero standing privileges. So just a quick simulation of what that might look like. Let's find our user again. And remove this group. So in this case, as an end user, I have no resources available. But what I do have available is chat ops. So in this case, I'm going to show a menu of available resources just via a chat window. And then I'm going to select one, for example, let's go ahead and get this SSH connection. You can see that the chat ops interaction is responding with an affirmative message here. And what I've got on my workstation now is exactly one SSH connection that's going to be provided for the next hour. I can connect to that resource from the command line. And then if we need to, we can, of course, go back and review that session that we just did. Okay, so what we've just looked at is authentication unified with your identity provider, authorization flowing from your identity provider, and that visibility and auditing that's individually identifiable down to the user, down to the resource level at an extremely fine grain. I hope that demo gives you a sense of what's possible by converging these workloads with identity. Okay, so looking ahead, we've worked with hundreds of enterprises across every industry to make what you just saw a reality for all types of sensitive systems and for the most demanding technical users, from DevOps to data science. Through this experience, we've discovered that most organizations have started their identity-driven access journey, but very few have reached the pinnacle of maturity. For example, the zero standing privileges case that we just illustrated. Wherever your team is on that journey, I hope that a well-baked unicorn cake is in your future.
All right. Thanks so much, Justin. Really appreciate that. I love the well-baked unicorn cake. I think maybe I want that for my birthday this year. But really cool demo as well on Zero Trust Security in action. So thank you for sharing that. I've just brought up the poll question for everyone out there that says, what additional information would you like about the Strong DM solution? And we do want to get your feedback on this. And of course, thank you to everyone who's asked questions there in the questions box for the Strong DM team. They'll be answering those electronically. So thank you for those. If you have other questions, please enter them now, and they'll do their best to get back to you as soon as possible. I'll leave this poll question up here while I announce our first winners on the MegaCast today. We've got an Amazon $300 gift card. This one going to Chris Becerra from Minnesota. Congratulations. And our first grand prize for a brand new iPhone 14 Plus going to Kitsy Pepper from Texas. Congratulations to our winners. Still many more to give out on the event today. So thank you to everyone who responded there to the poll. We do appreciate your feedback, but we also want to keep the MegaCast rolling. So with that, I'm excited now to welcome a friend of the MegaCast, a very smart man, Mr. Joshua Stenhouse, Field CTO for Cyber Resiliency at Rubrik. Hey, Josh, it's great to have you back on.
Hey, how are you?
Doing good. Take it away. Tell us about Rubrik.
Well, let's shoot from the hip. So we got 20 minutes and then some Q&A. And what I'm going to take you through is our perspective on Zero Trust and what it means for specifically the largest DR event that any organization is going to have, and that is ransomware attack. That's going to be the theme of this session, and basically everything that you're going to need to think about from a Zero Trust perspective to make that worst case scenario, the worst day probably in your professional career, a successful outcome and a successful recovery. So we start to go into a bit more detail. The key question that everybody has today is, if we get hit, can we recover? And not just can we recover, can we do it in a timely manner? And typically what you'd expect is that if any business is down for more than 24 hours, then serious questions are going to be asked. The impact is going to be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, and depending on your size, maybe tens of millions. And then you're also pretty much guaranteeing that you're not going to get away with it and that it's likely going to hit the press, because that's definitely not a technical blip after a 24-hour outage. And the lie that we all tell ourselves is that, well, my security is somehow better than somebody else's. And if you go back, if you think about the original inception of Zero Trust, where I know it's been said a million times and there's a million different interpretations, but the problem was that we had a trust model where we assign trust, a human emotion, where we're saying that we trust that that is going to be successful, that you're okay to do that, or it's going to do its job. And I would prefer to take the zero trust approach of, well, you can't trust that all your layers of defense will be successful, because that's a human emotion. You're trusting it. Well, I bought this. I picked the right one, so it must work. Because all we've seen since is that you can't trust that these layers of defense are going to be able to stop every attack. Easy example, you can have the best patching mechanism and system in the world and patch every day for everything, but you can have a 0-day vulnerability and you only find out that you've been exploited for the last month once you get the patch. If you look at, for example, endpoint protection, the majority of all ransomware attacks today, they're encrypting at the hypervisor level. Your endpoint protection can't stop them. You can't trust that, well, I've got good endpoint protection, I'm good. And the interesting lesson that we learned is, first of all, that if all these layers of defense fail, then what you're going to have to rely on is backup and DR. So all your security teams, the entire business, lo and behold, the backups that nobody ever thought that they would need to use in a security event is now the last line of defense of your business. So it's gone from mundane, do we have a backup? Yes, to now the entire survivability of your organization is reliant on a backup or a disaster recovery technology. And unfortunately, these were not built with zero trust in mind. And so all that you see is an attacker will get in, they will compromise them, and then they will remove your ability to recover. Or even if you try and protect them in some rudimentary way, they're going to remove all your visibility and significantly impact your ability to recover. So the net result of what we see there is that you can't recover. So the first problem that we help our customers with at Rubrik, and that everybody needs to make sure that they're covering, whether you're using Rubrik or not, is quite simply, you can't recover what you don't have. And furthermore, you can't trust that everything is going to be protected and immutable from that attack. So the key things that we help with and what you've got to look at is not just your on-premises data, which is a typical, usual, already focus of having backups, but you've also got to make sure you're looking at your large unstructured data sources, which typically don't have a backup, so they're compromised by taking out the NAS and the storage that it's on. You also got to make sure that you have an out-of-band backup for anything running in O365, because you can go and Google it, shared responsibility model. You might think that Microsoft have a backup. They don't. It's your responsibility. And then also cloud native, the same. That they don't back it up. You've either got to use their own backup tools or your own. But just because you create a VM in Azure or AWS does not mean that it's now backed up. You are responsible for backing it up. So one thing that we do at Rubrik is we have a centralized platform for managing all of this from a central location. So you don't have to have a different interface and a different job per source or site. You just create global policies, push them out, and protect everything. So there's huge benefits there of just removing the trust, in that I don't trust that you have created an Azure account and configured backup. I'm going to do that for you. But also, you still got control of the data locality, so we'll help customers create immutable data copies inside the data centers and then stream data through to object storage in the cloud. But there's an interesting thing that we found here when it comes to zero trust is that as soon as you start taking backups and putting them on immutable storage in the cloud, or snapshots in the cloud and then replicating them, then at that point, those controls are pretty robust and that we don't see them compromised. And it's ironic because if you go back 5 years, everybody said, oh, the cloud is definitely a security risk. But because of the high focus on security and network and account segmentation, the only thing we've ever seen really exploited in the cloud are leaky buckets. Once you firm those up, which has pretty much been done, then the biggest problem you have today is likely not securing the cloud data. It's the opposite. It's securing data in your data center. So this is where you've got to start applying zero trust principles to your on-premises backup and backup infrastructure. So these are all the core capabilities that Rubrik has, and so I'm going to show you a Rubrik logo on here, but you can take these same principles and go and then apply them to any other technology out there, or as many of them as you can, to at least strengthen your approach. Because when I'm talking about zero trust data security here, I'm talking about the last line of defense of your business. So that is applying zero trust principles to your backup and your disaster recovery capabilities. So the first thing is, it might seem a little bit backwards, but you've got to make sure that your backup and DR capability is a physical appliance. And you might say, well, I thought everything was virtual these days. But that is actually a fundamental problem, because if you're trusting that your hypervisor is not going to be compromised, guess what? You're going to find out the hard way you should not have trusted that. Because it's only by ensuring that your backups are physically isolated from the hypervisor itself that you're giving yourself the first shot of saying, well, if all the virtual machines are encrypted, I know they haven't removed my ability to backup, recover, or the backups themselves. But you've also got to make sure that you're not running Windows as part of this stack. Because if you trust Windows, I guarantee then you will learn the hard lesson, because from 150 plus ransomware attacks I've been a part of responding to, I can tell you Windows is compromised in 100% of the attacks. The only thing I would trust the recovery of my business on is a secure hardened Linux, no Windows, but you're still only as secure as your last update. So you have to make sure that it's very quick and there's no downtime to upgrade that platform, considering that the survivability of the business rides on it. I also got to make sure that you're not trusting that it will have the horsepower to actually give you a speedy recovery. So it can't just be put in one box and run, because the larger the environment, the more boxes, the more compute, the more storage you're going to need for giving you the parallelism to both backup and recover and deliver a decent recovery time objective. Table stakes, you've also got to make sure that it's encrypted end to end and that you can perform your own key management. But the other big factor to consider is you can't trust the network, because if an attacker gets onto that network, which between the zero-day vulnerability, VPNs and VDI, even with MFA, I hijack your machine, you VPN in via MFA, and I'm on your network. So if the attacker gets on the network, you got to make sure that you're applying zero trust to the network access. So you got to make sure that there's no access to the underlying operating system, the operating system shell, or the backup storage storing the backups. So there's no browsable mountable file system. Because guess what? If there is, attacker's going to access it. So at Rubrik, we do this by just not using standard storage protocols in the first place. It's all encrypted remote procedure calls. So this means there's no way any attacker can browse, access, or mount the file system. But you've also got to make sure the backups are immutable. Now, for a lot of you out there, if you don't already have immutable backups, you need this yesterday. I guarantee if you don't have immutable backups, then you've got nothing to recover whatsoever in that data center in the event of an attack. At Rubrik, we do this uniquely in that we've had immutability since day one when we first came to market 7.5 years ago. So this means we now have 5,000 plus customers. Every single one of their backups is immutable without them having to lift a finger, because it's baked into our proprietary append-only file system. So it makes it ridiculously easy. But the other thing you've got to make sure is that the attacker just can't simply log in and start expiring the backups, because it's actually a myth to think that, well, an attacker is just going to encrypt the data. They'll actually just have the backup platform expire it. So you've got to make sure that you have mandatory MFA, that's table stakes. You've also got to make sure you have a local user account, because again, zero trust. You can't trust that your directory service is even available, and likely it won't be. So at Rubrik, we give you a local user account with built-in MFA. Can't trust your MFA hasn't been compromised. You also can't trust that a admin account has not been compromised. So we layer on retention lock, so that even if a compromised backup admin successfully logs in and bypasses MFA, they still can't prematurely expire the backup. And then the last element of zero trust here in terms of protecting the data is you've got to make sure you don't even trust the time. The oldest trick in the book, if I want to expire all of your backups, all I've got to do is jump the clock. Backup platform will now say, hey, it's 2050, start expiring data. At Rubrik, we have a very unique way of solving for this. We never use the time for backup expiration. We use a monotonic clock. It's simply measuring the passage of time. It knows enough seconds have not passed, won't impact the expiration. Now, the last element of zero trust I want to cover on this slide is, and I see this all the time, especially from security professionals who should probably know better, is that not only are you presuming all of your security tools are going to stop the attacker, but you're also presuming that if they don't, that all of those tools are going to be available. And if any of those tools are running in Windows, or they're running in a virtual machine, or they're reliant on an external network connection, you have to presume that you're not going to immediately have access to them. So the other big thing that we focus on at Rubrik is that we build in all of our scanners in terms of looking at encrypted data, indicators of compromise, so that from this physically isolated platform, we're not trusting that anything else in that environment survives other than Rubrik. So we're also building in all of the scanners to identify encryption and malware to then give you the lowest recovery point and recovery time objective. And what we've seen is that it's only when you take all of these zero trust principles and apply it to your backups and your data center, that you stand a chance of making a major attacker recoverable event within hours versus days. And if you think about the cost of being down for days to go and figure or rebuild all of this, that is an easy cost justification on switching to Rubrik alone, never mind replacing your day-to-day backup and recovery technologies, which is what we do to make all of this happen. But a few of the learnings that I want to give you, because you might say, well, we already applied zero trust in that we have immutable backups today. So if we've got immutable backups, then we're good, yes? Well, unfortunately, what we know from 7 years in the market of having immutable backups since day one is that that doesn't mean that you've got cyber resilience. Because if you look at the median dwell time, in North America, 5 days, international, 9 days, attacker will gain access. Next, they're going to exfiltrate your data, and you might say, I don't have sensitive data. Well, everyone does, if you've at least got employee and customer PII. And then they're going to encrypt your data, and if you're running a hypervisor, 60% of attacks are now at the VM level. So I'll stop there for a second. Your endpoint protection cannot physically stop the attacker encrypting it, especially if you're running, for example, a VMware, where you can't install your endpoint protection on ESXi. All the VMs are gone, they've bypassed it. And because they're doing it at the VM level, it's also extremely fast. You don't see encryption attacks take multiple weeks, maybe 5-10 years ago, but the modern encryption attack, within 5 hours, everything's gone. And at that point, the clock is ticking. Your business is down, it's costing you. And then you've got to answer some pretty serious questions very quickly, presuming that all of the tools have failed and are not available. And the first one is, can we recover? And this isn't just a case of ensuring your backup infrastructure, so your data is immutable, your backup data. You've also got to make sure the infrastructure around it is immutable. Otherwise, you've got no capability to recover it. And you might spend the first 2 days building that because you trusted that the hypervisor was available. You can't trust that the EDR has survived the attack. So how do you know what is the blast radius of what was encrypted? Which files, which servers, which virtual machines? Your data classification tooling has likely also been taken out. And even if you had it still running, usually you're only looking at the top 20 to 40%. So the next problem is what sensitive data was on that network and at risk from exfiltration. Next key problem is when do you recover to? How do you find a clean recovery point if all you've got is the backups? And if you have to recover them one by one, how long is that going to take and how are you going to ensure you don't reintroduce the attacker? And then finally, once you've made that decision, how do you automate it, reduce the downtime, and prove all of this in advance? So these are all questions that you're going to have to answer, and you're going to have to presume, and you cannot trust that you've got anything else other than your backup platform surviving at that point. And so this is where Rubrik comes in, and how we deliver cyber resilience and not just backups. Because all of the requirements that you're going to need for a cyber recovery is what we build. And that first, we start by making sure that you have an immutable backup platform, both the data and the management, physically isolated, built-in scanners, scale out performance to give you the speed on backup, throughput, and then scanning all of that data. We also then layer in encryption detection, and this is from the purview of backups. So we're not reliant on any endpoint protection surviving or running, which is very important because you've already got that. And what we're saying here is that we're not just looking for in-guest encryption, because that is only 40% of attacks today. We're also the only vendor in the world, and from a backup perspective, looking at VM level encryption events. Everyone else is still trying to figure out anomalies. And the problem with anomalies is that all you're going to get is a high false positive rate. But the other important thing is that you got to make sure that this baseline encryption detection, which is saying that I don't trust that my endpoint protection, one, will catch all of attacks, because it won't catch VM level, or two, itself has even survived the attack. So my baseline detection is from my backups across everything. And if that fails, then we're going to plug it into our SIEM. So one recommendation on a SIEM is make sure it's not running in a VM in your hypervisor, because otherwise that's gone too. Next, we can't trust that our sensitive data scanning capabilities have survived, or we can't scan the current data because it's encrypted. So you've got to make sure that you have built-in sensitive data discovery. This is something Rubrik does uniquely from the backups themselves, so they're immutable. Even after the fact of an attack, we can tell you what data was in those backups and therefore on the network. It's incremental forever, so first scan of 1 billion files, yeah, it'll take a week, but the next scan, only 3% has changed. So say, this is the new hits that we found. And one of the biggest value our customers get from built-in sensitive data discovery is that, one, it doesn't impact production because you're scanning the backups. Two, that means it will survive the attack because it's built in. And then three, the biggest value is using it proactively to mitigate the risk in the first place. Because if you only look after the fact, too late, the horse already bolted. Next big thing you got to watch out for is trusting that you're going to know the recovery point. Zero trust, you're not going to know. And so the next challenge is, well, how are you going to make that determination? And this is actually the biggest mistake and time loss that I see on all ransomware recovery events, is that you have to recover everything, scan, rinse, and repeat because you can't trust the backups. So the unique technology that Rubrik has is that we have built-in threat hunting, where it's basically an IOC sweep of the backups in their offline state. You can use our intelligence that is continuously updated. You can feed in your own YAR rules hashes. But the key thing here that you're doing is quickly identifying the clean recovery point and then quarantining the known bad so the attacker can't be reintroduced. And then finally, as a complete end-to-end workflow, we then give you an automated recovery. So we know the last clean backup per server, which is a combination of the threat hunt and the encryption detection. You can recover to production, you can recover to an isolated network or set of servers of your choosing, report on this. But the most important thing here is that then you can use this in peacetime to prove your ability to recover. But all we've spoken about so far is the technology. The other thing that you can't trust, if we take zero trust to a people level, is that anybody knows what to even do or has ever been for a ransomware attack before. So we don't just trust that your team are all ninjas and have done this 100 times, because likely they haven't. So we also give you a ransomware response team. This is not a chargeable extra. If you're a Rubrik customer for backup, you get this. And you're probably going to call them on a weekend. This is a team that have done over 150 recoveries. And the best way to think about them is a bridge between your backup, security, and IR. Because all of those teams are going to need to work together. This team will stay with you until you no longer need them. And the net result of everything that I've spoken about is that this fundamental question, can you recover from an attack? You all have these multiple layers of defense. And underpinning it is backup and DR technologies that are not meant for this use case. They're not built for zero trust. So when the attacker gets in, they're done. You can't recover. And even if you make the backups immutable, you're not going to be online within 24 hours. So the change of Rubrik is that we take zero trust. We replace backup and disaster recovery technologies. And we make sure if everything else fails, that this fundamental question of can you recover from a cyber attack within 24 hours, we turn that from a I don't know, from a fiction to a yes and truth. So with that, don't back up, go forward. I think we're going to do a poll and look at some questions.
Absolutely. Yeah, great presentation, Josh. We do have a poll for everyone out there in the audience. The question is, what additional information would you like about the Rubrik solution? we just learned about. Feel free to select one or multiple options there in the poll, and we'll leave that up while we take your questions. So if you have a question, now is the time to get it in. Let's see, tons of good questions coming in for you, Josh. I'm going to go ahead, I guess, and just start with this one. How does Zero Trust negatively or positively impact RTO, recovery time, when it comes to recovering from a ransomware attack? Is there some kind of correlation there?
So, sorry, I'm distracted by looking at the poll coming in and the people of nothing at this time. And I'm thinking, hang on, that's confusing because if even if you're not directly related to backup, what I'd recommend is that if you know your organization cannot fundamentally answer that question, then you should definitely be just taking the data sheet and handing it on to your teams to look at, because it really is going to be, everybody needs backup. Everybody's going to have to use that to recover from an attack. And so that is always my number one recommendation, is that even if it's not your responsibility, it will be at some point. But the most three important elements of Zero Trust are: you can't trust that the hypervisor hasn't been compromised, you can't trust that the backup admin hasn't been compromised, and that even MFA will stop them, and that you can't trust that you're even going to know a clean recovery point.
Got it. Okay. Good deal. Lots of other good questions here. What about this one? If I already have immutable backups, am I protected from a ransomware attack?
So you're certainly protected. And so if you have them, great, well done. But your next step is you can't trust that the infrastructure surrounding it is also going to survive the attack. So first of all, you have to look at, well, what is the recovery time of rebuilding the infrastructure around the mutable backups? And then furthermore, what is the total recovery time if I then have to recover them all to scan to determine a clean recovery point? So it's a good starting point, but the bad news is that your downtime and your impact is still likely going to be measured in weeks and millions, because your next challenge is knowing which immutable backup to use from what point in time. And the trick is then how long that is going to take to figure that out to even recover it.
Okay, that makes sense. Here's an interesting question. Does Rubrik Zero Trust integrate with threat hunting solutions like XDR? Is there any reason to integrate there?
So not today natively, but it is something that we're looking at in the future, because today, via the UI and via the API, you can take any hash, throw it at our engine, and then we will immediately come back to you and say, hey, these are all the files from all the backups and all the servers that we found. So we've been working on speeding that up and making sure that we can get you that result back instantly across the time series. But it is going to be a future innovation of, okay, now let's start taking inputs from XDR so that then other parts of the security stack can start consuming our capability to find any hash from any time in the immutable backups. Okay,
that makes sense. What about this? There's a good question here. They want to know, Colin is asking, what kind of storage medium does Rubrik use for storing the data? Is it on premises? Is it on spinning disk? Is it on flash? Is it in the cloud, tape? What are the options there?
Yeah, pretty much everything other than tape. So in a data center, we're going to use a combination of spinning disk and flash cache, or all flash. We support all the major hardware vendors, because the best way to think about it is we're just giving you the operating system, the software, and then it's using local disk and then provisioning our file system on top. We can also stream data through to object storage in the cloud that we provide as a service. Rubrik Cloud Vault is basically Azure Immutable Blob as a service. But you can also roll your own, and then we'll take snapshots in cloud accounts, replicate and cross accounts. So the real answer is many different storage mediums, because what's appropriate in cloud is not appropriate on premises and vice versa for recovery time. So we use them all, except tape, where we can send to tape, but usually we're replacing it, just because tape is never going to deliver the recovery time objective required from a ransomware attack. It's just for checking a box for compliance. So usually we'll see customers keep doing the tape, but they'll use Rubrik for the actual ransomware recovery.
Makes sense. All right. What about, you mentioned storing the data in Azure Blob. What about protecting Azure VMs? running in the cloud.
Yeah, that's no problem for us. From our central platform, the Rubrik Security Cloud, you plug in all of your Azure accounts. It automatically discovers every VM, every SQL database, every SQL managed instance, also your blob storage, and then we'll basically automate creating a local snapshot and backup, and then we can replicate that cross-region and cross-account to get it out of band of the account itself.
Nice, nice. All right, well, what do you recommend folks do if they want to get started with Rubrik?
Go to the website, get the data sheet, and if you haven't got immutable backups, then get it yesterday.
Okay, I like it. I also like the upcoming Data Security Summit here. I was checking out on your website just now, right at the top, happening September 13th. Looks like a great opportunity to learn more. So, Josh, it's been great having you on the event today. Thanks so much for being on the MegaCast.
Thanks, Matt. Take care.
All right. Take care. All right. And, of course, thank you to Rubrik, of course, for supporting the MegaCast today. Check out the handout right there, the second one on the list of handouts. It is the definitive guide to Zero Trust Data Security from Rubrik. Looks like a great resource. I was just kind of skimming through it here. So make sure that you download that PDF, and you can check it out after the event. All right. If you haven't answered the poll, now's the time to do it, because I want to announce the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card. This is going to Steve Braham from South Carolina. Congratulations to our winner from South Carolina. Still a lot more prizes to give out on the MegaCast. And let's see, 4 more expert presenters still. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Speaking of which, I'm excited now to bring in our next presenter. Welcome to Ian Farquhar, Field CTO at Gigamon. Hi, Ian. Are you there?
I am certainly here. How are you?
I'm excellent. Excellent. It's great to have you on the event. I look forward to learning about what y'all are doing at Gigamon related to Zero Trust. So take it away.
Thank you. So, yes, hi, everyone. My name's Ian Farquhar. Today I wanted to talk to you about Zero Trust. Lots of vendors are talking to all of you about Zero Trust, I'm sure. A lot of them are saying, just by us, Zero Trust is done. And at Gigamon, we've been involved in Zero Trust for a great many years. We work with particularly US federal government agencies, but also enterprises all around the world. And as somebody who has been doing security architecture for probably 30 years, which is shocking for me to actually even acknowledge I've been doing it for that long, it's really disappointing to see people just running down little rat holes. So what I thought today would be really fun is do kind of I wanted to do Mythbusters, but, copyright issues. So let's just do truth versus fiction, because I spend a lot of my time talking to organizations, very large organizations with very, very serious risk problems. U.S. government agencies tend to attract some of the worst threat actors in the world, and they are trying to defend against that. What do I see happening? What are some of the common things that are done that don't work, and how can we actually make them work? How can we make this journey not something where we do a lot of work with a poor outcome, but rather we do a lot of work and we have a fantastic reduction in risk that the organization accepts? So if you don't know Gigamon, let me give you that quick obligatory vendor slide. We've been around for about 20 years, and our speciality is giving you visibility of traffic as it passes around your network, whether that is your on-prem network, the traditional stuff, your hybrid multi-cloud, that's being private cloud, public cloud, and indeed multiple public clouds. No matter where the traffic is, we can let you see it. And one of the things on this both slide is you'll notice that we are used by 10 of the top 10 US federal agencies. And that's really relevant because the Executive Order 14028, every one of those agencies is on an aggressive Zero Trust journey. So we've had a lot of experience going on that journey with them, and that's part of what's driving today. So I hope this is going to be an interesting presentation. That's me. I am the security CTO at Gigamon Worldwide. Yeah, let's just move on. Let's not dwell on that. So let's look at what I see as one of the first questions. And I have customers say this, we're doing Zero Trust. We're just doing we're just fixing up our IBM. We're just doing EDR, and we're done. Is that true? Well, no, it's not. Let me talk about why. And it's really interesting to me that a lot of people actually haven't seen this diagram, because this is the diagram from page 5 of the document that really defines what zero trust is. I'm not talking about John Kindervarg's original paper in 2010. I'm talking about the canonical NIST SP 800-207. And, it's a fairly simple concept. We have a subject on an endpoint that connects to a resource and it passes through a policy enforcement point that decides whether that's allowed. Okay, that's easy. That's just access control, right? But when you look at the next iteration of this, it gets really interesting. And this is the core part of what it is. You can argue that, yes, there's an endpoint in there with a subject. That subject has an identity. You have an endpoint that is capable of maybe of running EDR. You have a resource. But we're making a decision on the basis of risk. And we have this thing in our organization called a policy engine that is assessing, based on telemetry that's coming into that, whether that risk is allowed. Now, how does that actually work? How does that policy engine look at risk? Now, there are multiple models. There are about 10, maybe 11 zero trust models at the moment. There's the CISA one that the US civilian agencies use. There's DoD one. Forrester's got Zero Trust Extended. Gartner's got one. The Cloud Security Alliance has got one. But I think it's really CISA that is the nicest conceptual model. So let's just have a look at that. But others vary and others are different, but they all fundamentally look at the same thing. And this is a really key point. You're not just meant to be looking at the endpoint. You're not just meant to be looking at the user. You're actually meant to be looking at quite a few things. And you're meant to be looking, for example, at the application and workload. That's the fourth pillar there. You're meant to be looking at not only who's asking, but what they're going to. You're meant to understand the data that is on that. That's the data pillar. You're meant to understand the environment it's in. Now, Zero Trust says it shouldn't matter whether you're on the corporate network or you're outside, and it shouldn't. But it does actually count where you are. You're meant to be looking at identity. You're meant to be looking at the posture of the device. So anyone who says Zero Trust is purely about identity, Zero Trust is purely about the posture of the requesting device is kind of missing the point. In reality, we need to be looking at telemetry and data from all of these. And that's why the foundation of Zero Trust down the bottom is visibility and analytics, visibility into all of these things. So if you're looking at it just through one of those pillars, you're not doing full Zero Trust. That's not to say that pillar isn't important and you should be investing in it, but wholly investing in it, not the way to go. Visibility is critical. The other two things that are critical are, of course, automation and orchestration, because Zero Trust is all about instant response and constant evaluation, and governance, which is about your organization. If you look at this slide, this is actually a really nice way of looking at it, that, this pillar, which comes from a government document. This is not just Gigamon saying, hey, look at this. This is a well-developed conceptual model. And others are very, very similar in that. Let's have a look at another one. Zero Trust standards say the network can be ignored. There are indeed some people who will take this view, but I would argue that that's actually false. So what's my basis of doing that? Well, the first basis is that the standard actually says exactly the opposite. The enterprise is required to observe all network traffic. This is section 3.4.1, subsection 3, cleverly hidden under the totally obscure title of Network Requirements to Support Zero Trust. Very, very hidden. You need to observe all network traffic. You need to feed that into the policy engine so the policy engine can understand what's going on. Let's say, for example, that you've got an endpoint and you've got an attacker that's gotten onto that endpoint and disabled the EDR. and they've disabled it in a way that it's just invisible. How would you know that's happened? Well, if you're looking at the network, you can see the command and control channel. You can see the fact that it's compromised. It's really, really important to actually look at the network traffic. So if you are reading and getting somebody saying, we're just going to ignore the network, that is actually not a sensible thing to do, nor is it actually supported by the standard. Now, as I said originally, the Zero Trust was in fact created by a guy called John Kinderbart, who went at Forrester Research around 2009, 2010, created this concept. And John himself actually says, looking at the network visibility is critical. This paper is actually available. It's on Gigabot's website. You can go and have a look at the guy who created the whole concept and what he says about this. It's a really interesting, quite readable paper. If you're ignoring the network, you're ignoring one of the five fundamental pillars in the 5 pillars model. So another line that you'll often get is that every Zero Trust standard requires network segmentation. And network segmentation is fantastic. It's absolutely something we all should be doing in all of the environments we run. A lot of organizations go, well, actually, we're not ignoring the network. We're just doing segmentation, and that will prevent an attacker. Now, network segmentation does a whole bunch of things for you. It will make lateral movement of an attacker quite difficult. A lot of people will take the view that it will prevent lateral movement of an attacker. Now, one of the first ever Zero Trust implementations that was ever done was by the US government, and initially Gigabot was uninvolved in that. About 6 months into that project, they gave us a call, and they said, we've had a problem, can you come in? And what had actually happened is that they had a highly micro-segmented environment, and they had assumed that will prevent red team moving through the organization, or obviously an attacker in time. Did that work? Well, when the red team was brought in fact, it didn't really impede them that much. And if you want to read about that, you can actually look at this document, which is the case study we've provided, which goes into the fact that this pilot, this first ever full implementation of Zero Trust, required network visibility because they realized that as you look at an attacker moving through your environment, the network is one of the best places to catch them from. An attacker who gets on a workload, they're going to do 2 things as soon as they get on there. The first thing they're going to do is degrade or disable logging. And the second thing they're going to do is try and turn off any endpoint security tools. And while the endpoint vendors will tell you, absolutely rightly, that they've got controls that will prevent that from happening, they're not perfect controls. There's attacks like BYOVD that allow you to do that. But if you are looking from the outside, if you are looking from outside their blast radius, they can't do anything about that. You can see them, you can spot them. Network visibility is so important. And it doesn't matter whether this is on-prem, public cloud, private cloud, containers, any of those environments. Network visibility is absolutely critical. So let's look at just a couple of other things. I actually totally agree you should do segmentation, and there's some really interesting developments in that. We're getting, macro segmentation. We've had that for years. VLANs, small zones, micro segmentation down to the host level, and then this new concept that's come out of the DoD, which is software-defined perimeters. The idea that your segmentation is dynamic and application-driven, so it opens up as needed and closes down when it's not, which is a really cool concept, and I absolutely love it. But you've really got to also look at how you do it. You've got the planning phase. How do you do it well? How do you make it as tight as possible so it's secure as possible without disrupting business? You've got the debugging phase where you've deployed it and now you've got things breaking. And how do you fix that? Is it segmentation that's breaking it? Is it something else? And finally, once you've got it in there, you also don't want to do what DoD found. You lose visibility because an attacker in your environment is making a lot of noise on the network. And if you can't see them because of your own segmentation plan, that's a significant strategic loss. So there's a post-deployment phase. And to support this, Forrester actually wrote a document on doing segmentation to Zero Trust. it's really hard to do. 11 out of the 14 customers who tried, in their words, did not achieve the desired security outcome, aka failed. So if you have visibility, the planning phase becomes a lot easier. You can see what's talking to what. The debugging phase becomes, I can see the problem because I can see the application being blocked. And you can have, in post-deployment, full visibility of everything that's happening while still having a segmented network. So that attacker that runs an Nmap scan to see where they can get actually will be visible to you, and your policy engine can decide to take that host out. There's the document. And yes, there are some approaches that use agent-based. They're not using firewalls. They're not using switches to do it. Is there any role for network visibility? Absolutely yes, because you could have, if you've got a threat actor who takes out that agent, then they've got full access to the network. That's not great, but if you can see it, then you can see them moving around in a way they shouldn't be able to. So even if you're using approaches like, say, color tokens or Illumio, then you can there's definitely still a strong case for having network visibility. So here's a big one. And I see this all the time. It's not like people actually call this out. They just don't think about it. If you are building controls, you should, in Zero Trust, always think about those controls being compromised by a sophisticated threat actor. We have seen firewalls broken into. We have seen all sorts of things. This is something you need to actually worry about. So how do you do that? You know, this is clearly false. Even the standards themselves. You assume a threat actor is present in your environment. You assume that some of your environment may be compromised. And fundamentally, you don't trust anything in your environment. And people don't seem to make the logical link. That means I shouldn't even really trust the controls I'm using to implement CTA. So what do we do about that? Well, firstly, we take on board this concept of implicit trust, the idea of trusting something without proof that's trustworthy. Secondly, you understand that this means not just thinking about your users, your devices, your workloads, but even your controls. Anything, absolutely anything, particularly if you've got a high risk appetite, can be compromised. But how do we actually do that? Because this is, those in the Department of Defense, those of us who have actually engineered defense networks actually think about this, but a lot of other people don't. But we need to start doing so. And by the way, just a side comment here. If you have implemented Zero Trust and your entire Zero Trust infrastructure can be compromised by taking out one control, you're actually not doing Zero Trust because you are doing implicit trust in that control. Take out that control, everything's gone. You've not done Zero Trust. That is Zero Trust in a control. And secondly, and I'm going to say this, any vendor who comes in and says, just buy us and Zero Trust is done, I spoke to a major US government agency, and their response to that was, yeah, if a vendor does that, we basically end the meeting and ask them to leave. Any vendor who does that thinks you don't understand either you don't understand Zero Trust or they don't understand Zero Trust, but either is really bad. Zero Trust is always a multi-vendor, hybrid, multi-cloud deployment. So if you have one vendor, you're not doing Zero Trust. It's going to be multiple vendors so that you are not implicitly trusting one vendor. So how do we do this? Well, you need to understand how the policy engine works. And the policy engine is going to be driven by telemetry. There really are three major sources of telemetry. There's our original logs, there's agents like EDR, and there is what Gigamon calls deep observability, but essentially visibility of the network. What is happening on the network? And that doesn't mean perimeter visibility. That means lateral visibility. That means east-west in all of the environments that we have. If we could see that, then we have a very rich source of telemetry, but there's something you need to observe. Firstly, if you are observing logs or from an endpoint, you are inside the blast radius of an attacker. Those things come from inside the workload. So logs come from the host or the application, and agents run on the workload. And if that attacker compromises that workload, they can actually compromise that telemetry. And that actually means that this telemetry is mutable. It's observability, but it can be affected by the attacker. But if you are looking at network transaction, that's coming from a platform that is separate. It's outside the blast radius of an attacker. And if a tap is there, either a physical tap or a span port or a VPC flow mirroring up in VPC traffic mirroring, up in Amazon, it's outside the blast radius. There is nothing the attacker can do about it. It is actually much, much harder for an attacker to compromise and almost impossible for them to fake. It's a very, very powerful form of telemetry for catching malicious threat actors and lots of other things as well. And I want to make it clear here. I've just told you about this concept of deep observability. I've told you that NIST SP 800 says you are meant to be doing network visibility. You are meant to be able to observe network traffic. So is this guy from a networking company saying you need to do deep observability, you need to do network visibility, and don't worry about the rest? No, I am not saying that, and Gigabomb will never say that. We have a much, much more interesting message for you. What we are saying is you should be doing all of them. Because if you're doing all of them, you have multiple rich sources of data feeding your policy engine. You have stuff for the AI and the ML in your policy engine to correlate so that when a workload, when let's say a service does a particular function, a microservice in the cloud, for example, and it serves a database, it gets this log, the EDR does this, and it does this network traffic, and it starts to correlate those and understand what normal looks like. So when that workload diverges from normal because something is wrong and there's a risk present, then the policy engine responds. So I want to come to zero trust truth, because I've talked about lots of things that are false. But let's talk about the things that are true, the converse of those things. Zero trust is about identity, and it is about endpoints, but it's also about the network, the workload, and the data. So first thing, when you're doing zero trust, look at all of those things. And I'm not saying give them equal weight. I'm not saying start all of them at the same time. Start them whatever makes sense to your enterprise. But don't ignore the others. And any vendor who tells you it's just about identity, it's just about EDR, no, it's not. And it's not just me saying that. That's the CISA, Zero Trust one of the biggest zero trust frameworks in the world. That structure makes sense. That is what is true. You need to look at all of those things to do zero trust properly. Secondly, you can't ignore the network. The defining canonical standard says so. You really need to make sure that you are looking at the network for zero trust to be successful. By the way, not everything supports EDR. Not everything supports logging. Those devices, you can always look at them from the network. Segmentation is important, but it's inadequate by itself. Your attacker can still laterally move. You need to look at the network and catch them moving. And finally, your controls will fail. Insider threats might turn them off, an attacker can degrade them. Your telemetry can be compromised. Build defense in depth, which is just another way of saying driving out implicit trust, and build that into your control. That's tenet number 3 of the canonical defining standard. So this is some of the truths that we have actually learned in the past 3 years of doing zero trust. It's absolutely essential to get this right and do it properly. And once you do it this way, you'll actually find there's a whole bunch of other really interesting follow-ons that I don't have time to talk about in 20 minutes. But thank you very much today. I hope this has been useful. And let's go to Q&A.
Absolutely. Great presentation, Ian. We do have some questions for you. While we take those questions from the audience, I'm just going to bring up this poll for everyone out there. We want to get your feedback on this. What additional information would you like about the Gigamon solution? The poll question is on the screen, and we want to get your feedback. So I'll go ahead and just start with, let's see, the first question I see here, and that is, sorry, I just lost it. Here we go. That is from David, who's asking, what are the driving factors you see in your clients that make them reach out and eventually utilize your product?
There are a whole bunch, and it's impossible to say one. Let me go a couple of the more interesting ones. They're running industrial control systems. They're running SCADA environments. They're running critical infrastructure. They can't run EDR. They can't do logging from these environments, but they can look at the network. The other things, for example, they're aware that they have a really bad supply chain risk. Supply chain risk, particularly certain types of supply chain risks, are not easy to see with EDR and impossible to see with logging. The risk is not going to log the fact that it's there, but you will actually see them from the network by observing the command and control channel. But also because organizations understand that if you take out a control, if you take out a source of telemetry, and logging is the big one, we saw that in multiple attacks. It's even a minor attack technique. While you can turn off logging, you can't actually turn off visibility of the command and control and the activity that you are doing to compromise the host. I was talking to somebody who is used to run a cyber warfare capability for a particular nation state. And I said to him, I've got this customer who's doing zero trust, and they're doing it via logging and EDR, and he just laughed and he went, yeah, I'd love to have heard that one of my targets was doing that. I'd be all over them. It is really a very powerful way of detecting risk. And what's interesting is it allows you to treat all of your environments, clouds, both types of cloud and on-prem, in exactly the same way. So it simplifies and drives a lot of complexity out of zero trust, which is part of that 20-minute thing I can't talk about in 20 minutes because it's a sophisticated argument. But tons and tons of drivers, and they're all over the place.
Excellent, excellent. Another good question here. What's the difference between traditional VPN products and modern zero trust network access solutions?
VPN products were basically an all or nothing, and you authenticated and then you're in. Whereas ZTNA introduces, and by the way, I don't consider ZTNA to be the same thing as ZTA. It's just an edge-based solution. And the whole concept of ZTA is it's the whole of enterprise solution, but also great step in a step to a full ZTA by starting with ZTA. Totally okay with that, and that is the constant reevaluation of what the individual is doing, and making sure that they look like the person they are. I've seen so many VPNs used as ways into organizations because they're an all or nothing thing. Credentials get stolen and the attacker is in, and unless someone notices the timing of when they come in or the amount of data that they do, they're in for good. But at least with ZTNA, you are looking constantly and reevaluating them. But don't think ZTNA and full ZTA give you the same value. They absolutely don't. ZTNA should be an very early first step that gives you a lot of value as you move towards a proper enterprise-wide hybrid multi-cloud ZTA.
Got it. Okay. Nick is asking, does Zero Trust require good transparency when it comes to third-party vendors you're sharing data with?
If you were to do a ZTA that where you were sharing data, say some sort of managed ZTA service, yeah, I would want a lot of that there. It's not a model I've ever seen deployed at this stage. Most of them are all in-house, but we're certainly aware, and without naming names, that some of the cloud vendors are looking at providing policy engines, and I would really want to make sure that I had good agreements and strong legal basis for that information sharing, yes. Because you're going to be sharing a lot of sensitive information, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Another good question here, how can I leverage my existing security and network infrastructure as part of a transition to zero trust network access? Do folks have to throw out their current network and security infrastructure to implement zero trust, or is it an important part of it?
I don't see anyone practically doing that. I mean, one of the things is that every single when you are moving to zero trust, you're not going to do a totally throw everything out and put new stuff in. Every single standard is turned into a maturity model. It's not something we do at once. And in fact, one of the things we've realized is that almost all zero trust implementations are actually pushed from the top down to IT. They're not coming from IT. They're pushed almost always from the executive. Even the US government, Executive Order 14028, that's an order from the president. So it's coming from the boss. It's a maturity, it's a big process, and it will have multiple stages. So at the end, when we get to the end, we might have thrown out most of our security infrastructure. I don't really think so. But at the beginning stages, we're going to be working with what we've got. And that's part of why I said it's always going to be a multi-vendor, hybrid, multi-cloud environment, because we are going to be integrating a whole bunch of disparate tools. And I see no problem integrating existing tooling into that. We essentially are going to be taking telemetry. So if I've got existing firewall logs, if I've got existing infrastructure and old EDR, I'm going to start by feeding all of that telemetry into my policy engine and letting the policy engine do with it what it can as I transition and upgrade into something better. So yeah, it's not going to be greenfields. As nice as that would be for us all, new toys to play with, it's always going to be an integration exercise that matures over time. It's really funny to observe all the models. As they release new models, they always get more and more maturity steps. And that's because people understand that this is a big journey we're all on, and it's going to take quite a few years. And the more realistic we make it and the easier we make it, the better outcomes we're going to get.
Absolutely. Great advice. Well, Ian, I'm afraid we're running out of time here for live Q&A. There's a lot of great questions still for you there in the electronic queue. If folks want to get started with Gigamon, what do you recommend?
Give us a call. Look, I would recommend firstly just read the papers we've provided. Have a look at our website. We have a great Zero Trust section, and just read and understand what we're saying. And I'm going to say also one more thing. Please go and actually read the standards as well. Don't just listen to what vendors are telling you. Go and read this SP 800-207. It's a very readable document. Go and have a look at what the organizations that are really setting the maturity models, the frameworks and everything are doing, and choose one that makes sense. Don't also just divide it up into the bits that you want to do. Have a strategy over, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, to achieve a high maturity outcome. Don't do it scattershot. Actually have a plan and implement on that plan.
Great advice. All right. Well, thank you very much, Ian.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time today.
And thank you to Gigamon, of course, for supporting the event. Check out the handouts tab there as well. There's a handout with the Gigamon name on it. And if you click on it, you'll download a PDF resource entitled 2 Reasons to Make Network Visibility a Foundation of Your Zero Trust Architecture. So make sure you check that one out. All right, if you haven't answered the poll, now is the time to do it, because I'm announcing our next prize winners here. We've got another Amazon $300 gift card. This is going to Paul Batcon from Maryland. And our next grand prize for another iPhone 14 Plus, this is going to Mike Stevens from North Carolina. Congratulations. All right, and with that, it's time now to bring in our next presenters on the MegaCast. Welcome to Jay Tilson, Director of Strategy and Field CTO, and John Spiegel, Director of Strategy and also a Field CTO, both from Axis. John and Jay, it's great to have you on the MegaCast. I'll hand it off. Take it away.
Security Service Edge approach. Before we get started, let me introduce you to your host today. My name is Jay Tilson. I'm joined by my colleague and my friend, Mr. John Spiegel. Together, John and I have over 50 years of enterprise experience running large infrastructure and security teams. We spent the bulk of our careers sitting in your chairs, and we have experience of the same daily challenges you have. Not just the technical challenges, but the cultural, budget and resource challenges that you also have. Recently, we left our roles in the enterprise space and moved to a company called Axis Security, which is now part of HP Aruba Networking. We made this move because we both believe networking security are marred with complexity. We both feel that stitching together solutions that worked in the early 2000s no longer works in the world that we live in today. We found that this approach created more challenges, and when deployed it looked like a game of mousetrap, and we both believe there is a better way of doing this. I think we all have to agree that change isn't coming, but that it's already here. Our users are now mobile and accessing systems and data from everywhere, including their homes, the office, places like coffee shops, hotels and airports. More and more applications have migrated to the cloud, and that trend isn't stopping anytime soon. There are also more devices than ever before. We have IoT devices, smart devices, BYOD, and the number is continuing to increase at an alarming rate. Along with these changes come more cyber threats from an increasing number of strategic cyber criminals. There was a 270% increase in social engineering attacks and a 1500% increase in attacks against risky VPNs in 2022. And ransomware was named the top threat type, with the number of attacks increasing over 220% in the second half of the year alone. All of the top analysts expect these attacks to continue to grow more and more throughout the next decade. This change that we have all witnessed over the last few years has meant that the concept of zero trust is back at the forefront of everyone's mind. It's been mandated by the US government in an executive order which has made it part of every CISO strategy. At Axis, adaptive trust, a framework built on zero trust, is at the core of everything we do. This is the notion of continually to adapt connectivity based on changes in context such as identity, device, policy, applications and data. There is no implicit trust, but we establish trust that is contextual and adaptive. For work to get done, users will inevitably require access. In other words, they will need to establish trust. Adaptive trust continuously ensures that only specific users gain access to specific applications, and we use API-based integrations between our core security services to automate this process.
There are 5 areas where trust should be adaptive and continuously assessed. These are identity. We establish identity through one of our partner IDP providers. As status changes for individual identities, so should permissions. Device. The user's device posture is confirmed prior to and continuously checked when accessing an application. This posture can be for things like an operating system. Maybe it's a patch level. Is the disk encrypted or is the firewall turned on? We ensure a device reaches a security posture requirement before it can connect to the network, and if the posture changes in any way, access can be automatically adjusted or removed. Policy. We manage lease policy at scale, and any policy changes are reflected globally within 60 seconds. It's critical that access policy changes should go into effect immediately to minimize any security gaps. Applications. Trust is adaptive depending on the type of application being accessed. For example, context matters. It matters when you're accessing a private application or a cloud application. Or it could be because you're accessing the internet. It's worth noting that at Axis, our belief is that we leave no application behind. You need a full suite of applications to make that move to zero trust. Troublesome ZTNA protocols like Voice over IP and ICMP must be supported. Data. Lastly, we can protect your data by controlling the flow. We know and we can see and we can control what users are accessing and what type of information it is. Ultimately, these technologies are the core components of a framework called SASE, or Security Access Service Edge. Introduced in 2019, SASE addresses the traditional dilemma presented to every network and security engineer when faced with how to deploy a new application. Do I favor speed or do I favor security? SASE overcomes this dilemma by moving services to POPs so that they are as close as possible to the user or resource. SASE is delivered in two technology stacks. On one side, WAN edge services, most commonly part of the speed aspect. And then on the right, there's SSE, which is security focused. IT teams are turning to SASE for modern security access, but also seeking vendor consolidation. In fact, 41% say they adopt SASE by the end of 2022, and 75% are looking to adopt SASE in the next 12 to 24 months.
Recently, Axis, in partnership with Cybersecurity Insiders, conducted the first ever research on SSE adoption. We wanted to understand where people are on their journey. The report has some very good insights and is well worth a read, but for this presentation I just want to pull out a few key takeaways. Firstly, the report showed that both elements of SASE, the WAN edge services and SSE, are on the rise, which backs up the need for change as we just discussed. Secondly, it's interesting to note that SSE is seen as a strategic initiative to secure the workforce, with 39% of respondents viewing it as the most important part of their zero trust strategy, even over things like identity providers and endpoint protection. Lastly, and I think more importantly, as companies look to implement SASE, 67% of businesses plan to start their SASE strategy with SSE versus 33% starting with WAN edge services. This really shows that security teams are gaining traction against the network teams within a business. The CISO is becoming more powerful. So with all this talk of change, let's just remind ourselves about the three different approaches we have to secure our workforce in this new hybrid world. Firstly, we have the hub and spoke design. This is a progression from the old castle and moat design where everyone was inside our perimeters. But this design still focuses on having on-premise security, even though the users and their data have started to move to the cloud. With this design, there is still a heavy reliance on MPLS and internal data centers. And in my experience, this model is complex to configure and to administrate. You need to feed in water the applications to ensure they remain secure, and you also have to go through hardware renewal cycles, as well as continually patch all of your systems to protect them against attack. Another option we have is virtualized cloud firewalls. This is really an evolution of the hub and spoke design, moving some of those legacy-based security systems that used to run on hardware to cloud-based solutions. The aim here is to remove some of the burdens of keeping systems secure. However, in a lot of cases, this still meant backhauling internet traffic to the corporate network and data center. This design is supposed to make things simpler to manage, but in my experience, it can lead to further complexity and cost. Then there is SSE. In my mind, this is the design of the future. This is delivering all of your connectivity and security tools from the cloud. Gone are the days of patching your systems, and SSE is going to stand side by side with you in the battle against the bad guys. So let's take a look at the Axis Atmos platform. The platform was designed on day one to bring networking and security together. It is all about harmonizing what in the past was a symphony that played as individuals versus as a team. In the past, the enterprise would have to select one vendor for networking, one for security, one for DLP, one for the WAN, and one for cloud security controls. As we all know, this leads to operational complexity, high costs, and ultimately poor security design. Axis, on the other hand, starts with a clean slate. As we have discussed, at the core of the platform is this concept of adaptive trust. Instead of placing the employee, the third party, and their devices directly on the network, Axis Atmos starts with a series of checks to verify the identity of the user as well as the posture of the device, and it balances this with the request for the applications and data. If the calculation does not add up, the employee is not granted access. So building on this concept of adaptive trust, Atmos provides global reach with over 500 edges to its SSE services, including SWG, CASB, and ZTNA. It brings together what were previously individual point solutions into a single integrated platform delivered via the cloud. This enables secure access not only for your remote employees, but also for your office workers and those critical third-party and contractor resources.
So let's break down these services. As you dive deeper into SSE solutions, you'll find that each solution emphasizes one of the technology areas. Maybe it's Swig because that company started there, or maybe it's CASB because that was the target market they were looking to be competitive in. At Axis, we take a different approach. We believe the future was about transitioning to a new security strategy based on zero trust. Only provide the resources to perform a function, nothing else and nothing less, and then vigilantly watch for indicators of change in a negative manner. We built our platform to deliver zero trust network access. The strategy is at the center of everything we do. It's the foundation of the technology that we built. The future, it's about delivering secured access for applications, whether they're in the cloud or in your private data center. Services must be delivered in the same manner, no matter the location, with checks like MFA, device posture, and requests for data based on business policy. We've solved this in an elegant way for both your employees and those difficult to secure third-party access. Building on the concept of zero trust as our foundation, we then add features to our platform, like Secure Web Gateway, which is fundamental for securing your remote employees from the internet. Or maybe it's leveraging SaaS applications like Salesforce or O365. Utilize our cloud-based access broker or CASB. Or maybe you want to see how your applications are performing. How is it performing on the network? Is it slow or is it fast? If so, digital experience monitoring is available. Quickly uncover where an application problem is. Is it the network? Is it the device? Is it the application? If so, DEM has you covered. So let's dive into the mechanics of the Atmos SSE platform. A few minutes ago, we mentioned this concept of adaptive trust. This is the foundation of Atmos. It's how we make zero trust possible to elevate your security posture. Atmos sits in the middle. It's like a conductor leading an orchestra of application requests with a watchful eye. Access can either be granted either agent-based or agentless. Either way, Atmos sits in the middle and provides full Layer 7 visibility. And if it's agent-based, we also get posture checks. This is things like, is my patching up to standard? Is the disk encrypted? And so on. A key aspect of the Atmos is that it's vigilant. It is watching the transaction in real time. If there's a policy violation or something changes, it can sever that connection in a matter of seconds. This is a critical capability you need in zero trust solutions. The ability to monitor a connection from the start and to the finish.
So far in this session, we have talked about SSE and its elements and the Atmos platform and how it works. But what are the benefits of Axis Atmos SSE, you may ask? So firstly, it increases your security posture by providing adaptive trust access to all services and applications. You eliminate your attack surface and reduce your exposure. You also get to enforce least privileged access to applications and services, including private applications, SaaS applications, and the internet. This will help you protect your business against ransomware and data loss. Secondly, you can deliver the best experience possible for your end users and IT administrators. Your end users receive quick, seamless access to application services and data every time because of our intelligent smart routing across 500 plus edge locations. Also, our IT administrators can control access centrally and granularly, making it easy to secure the business from a holistic perspective. Lastly, you get to optimize your business with one solution for all your secure access needs. You get to simplify and unify networking and security functions and minimize complexity by reducing the number of point product solutions you have in play. Additionally, you get to save money by reducing reliance on application-based security solutions, and we can effortlessly scale with you with our cloud-delivered platform. So for us, customers are key. Their challenges are similar to yours. For instance, the city of San Jose. Their challenge was the hybrid workforce. Like many in the post-pandemic world, they have embraced remote work, but they also know the power of creating a strong work culture. So the city of San Jose adopted a 3-day remote and 2-day in the office approach. This blend allows them to provide the best of both worlds, but if you do not have a way of delivering applications, work productivity declines. After conducting an extensive search, the city of San Jose selected the Axis Atmos as their platform. Why, you may ask? Well, there are a number of reasons. Firstly, simplicity and the ability to support challenging zero trust protocols like VoIP and ICMP. Next, there was server-initiated flows, which allowed them to patch remote machines while still maintaining a strong security posture. The days of VPN for them are gone. Next, there is Procter & Gamble. Their challenge was third-party access. Being one of the biggest multinationals in the world, their base of contractors is extremely high. Their need is how to secure them and maintain their intellectual property. In the past, this meant sending over 1,000 laptops out to those contractors. The turnaround time to onboard a contract was extremely high and expensive. By moving to Axis, they were able to leverage our agentless approach. This meant that the contractors could take a BYOD solution. The result? Over $10 million saved per year, and the time to value went from 24 days to 24 hours. Their ROI was sub 1 month, and that is the power of the Axis platform. Lastly, there is VisionWorks, a national optical chain. Their challenge was legacy hardware. Like many companies, they were sending their network traffic to their data centers for security treatment. This hairpinning of traffic slowed down their business as well as was expensive from a hardware perspective. By moving to Axis, they could reduce their hardware investment, optimize network flows as well as secure their clinics. The ROI was extremely quick, 700 stores in a matter of days. So traffic optimization with adaptive trust and visibility provided by the Axis Atmos digital experience tool gave them wins all around.
So where do you go from here? I would like to make it clear that making the move to SASE is a journey, and we're here to support you. But where you start, that's up to you. It's really about solving critical business challenges. So maybe your need is connecting your branch office or retail locations to improve connectivity and security. If so, start with Aruba's best-in-class SD-WAN solution known as Edge Connect. Or maybe your challenge is how to secure your remote workforce or third-party contractors. If so, start with the most innovative SSE solution on the market. That's Axis Atmos, now powered by HPE. But one item to note is that when we talk with customers, their biggest challenge is this: security portfolio sprawl. Different services from different vendors with no integration. Hard to manage, hard to operate, high costs, and low security outcomes. We take a different approach. We want to provide you a unified approach. Consolidation. Help you start standardizing. Bring together ZTNA, SWIG, CASB, and even network elements under one solution. Ultimately, that's the real goal of the SASE journey. The result? Easy to manage, easy to operate, lower costs, and higher security outcomes. Jay and I would like to thank you for joining us today. Hopefully everyone found this session useful. If you'd like to discuss what you learned here further, feel free to reach out or scan the QR code or contact us directly. Thank you again for your time.
All right, great session. Thank you so much to the Access team, Jay and John. A really great presentation. I've just brought up the poll question for everyone out there on the event. We want to get your feedback on this poll. What additional information would you like about the Access solution? A data sheet, white paper, case studies, pricing. Maybe you want to get a personal demo and see the solution for yourself, or just try it for yourself in your own environment. So I'll leave the poll question up for you there. The Access team is taking questions electronically. So we got lots of good questions coming in. Thank you for those. They'll be doing their best to respond to all of those electronically, and we appreciate the good questions. I also want to encourage everyone to check out the handouts tab there in your audience console. Number 4, Access Security. If you click on that, that will bring up a resource that covers Atmos by Access, how to secure the modern workplace with the world's most elegant, secure service edge platform. So make sure that you check out that resource, really nicely done. All right, I see quite a few poll responses coming in. Thank you for those. Let's get just a few more. All right, excellent. Let me now announce the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card for this session. This is going to Jill Jung from Illinois. Congratulations, Jill Jung from Illinois. All right, thank you to everyone who responded there to the poll. It's now time to move on to our next presentation on the MegaCast. I'm excited now to welcome Narendran Vaidishwaran, Director of Product Marketing for Identity Protection and Zero Trust at CrowdStrike. With that, I'll now hand it off to you, Narendran. Take it away.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here today giving you a presentation on Zero Trust. So firstly, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining us today in this webinar on Zero Trust. So this webinar will focus on why a layered defense is important to start your Zero Trust journey or to advance your journey wherever you are in the Zero Trust initiative. I'm Naren Vaidishwaran, Director of Product Marketing for Identity Protection and Zero Trust here at CrowdStrike. I have over 17 years of experience in cybersecurity and more recently on several Zero Trust projects since 2017. So with that out of the way, let's dive in. So what is layered defense and why is this important to Zero Trust? Layered defense, as the name implies, it's quite intuitive. I don't have to explain so much in depth. But in general, it refers to the multiple layers of defense your organization might have already implemented over the years. Right, so you may have focused at these different layers for protecting north-south traffic and the east-west traffic over the years. So you may have achieved this with, for example, firewalls, the perimeter firewalls, the DMZs, the antivirus tools, the EDR, intrusion detection systems, intrusion prevention systems, privilege access control tools, MFA, and many more. Right. Having said that, the security challenges were not any simpler when corporate networks had a definitive perimeter. So however, today, we are in a perimeterless setup, perimeterless environment. So this has further increased the security challenges, not to mention the increased complexity and costs as well. So today's workforce, as you know, is remote or hybrid. Many are coming back to office, or some are still working from home. It's kind of hybrid situation, and the organizations have to be prepared to accommodate both these situations, right? So your users access applications hosted on premises or in the cloud, and also from multiple endpoints. So given that as the context, if you read the news, almost every day you come across a new vulnerability or an attack, right? You notice how adversaries are innovating every day to gain access to your network, specifically to steal the data. And this is evident with many of the recent ransomware and supply chain attacks. So this is, of course, in addition to the nation state actors that are constantly improving their game by moving laterally across the organization, virtually undetected. So here is a high-level view of the MITRE TTPs, the tactics and techniques and procedures. So of course, the adversaries are not moving in a linear and a predictable manner, which will make our jobs much more easier, but it is not, right? So we have all seen several attacks like the Log4j, the Print Nightmare, or the relatively recent Volt Typhoon type of attacks that the adversaries are constantly innovating to find the path of least resistance. That is to infiltrate into your organization, move laterally, and exfiltrate the data or encrypt the data for ransomware purposes. So now when organizations tell us we are looking to strengthen security and further our zero trust initiatives with MFA, is that enough? So that's a primary question that many have, and maybe for a while the MFA will be good enough. It's no doubt a strong method of authentication and identity verification, but MFAs can still be bypassed. At the same time, MFA is also a critical component in the big zero trust equation. So, so having said that, it's not like MFA or one specific technology or tool is going to help with zero trust. It's going to be a combination of different tools. Some of them you will already be having in your organization, and some of them you may have to acquire or install it new and then probably switch to a new one. So it depends on where you are already in your zero trust journey and how you kind of envision zero trust. But in general, thanks to the analyst community, the technology leaders, and the practitioners, zero trust has gained a lot of traction. So at least that's what we are witnessing in our interactions with several organizations cutting across various verticals. So we are now coming across organizations that understand what zero trust is not, because that's important. That is, they understand that it is not a do-it-all security tool. Neither does one need to rip and replace the existing security investment, the infrastructure tools, and also completely re-architect the network, right? It's good to see that most organizations understand that zero trust is a security strategy with the assumption that the adversary is already inside the organization. And that the critical piece of zero trust, that trust is never to be granted implicitly. Looks like it's all good here when we talk to customers and organizations, right? But we would also like to think so that it's all good here. But in almost every conversation, we are being asked, how can you help us start or further the zero trust journey? So how do I efficiently determine if I should allow or deny the subject, which is on the left, to access the resource? And how do I do this or achieve this without adding additional friction? So remember, friction is not just for the end user, it also matters to your SOC teams and the IT teams. Well, all said and done, so the organizations have a good grip on what zero trust means, but what are the challenges? The first is the security coverage. Organizations that have been there for several years may be moving to the clouds, digital transformation, right? However, they still have several legacy endpoints on which they may not be able to install the endpoint security tools or the agents or sensors, whatever you may call. Or these could be unmanaged endpoints from the contractor, the vendor contractor ecosystem, who might be accessing several on-premises and cloud applications from anywhere. Also, it could be the identity store sprawl with millions of authentication requests happening in real time. So how to determine which of these authentications or authentication requests are genuine and which of these access request should be challenged with identity verification or conditional access. Also, we get several questions like how to get holistic visibility, how do I kind of continually ascertain the risk posture across my organization, and where do I need to invest to meet the regulatory requirements. I think the most popular ones right now is becoming eligible for cyber insurance, or in the underwriter terms, becoming cyber insurable, right? Improving the insurability. So there are so many questions, so many challenges relating to security coverage, and that's a core component that Zero Trust aims to address. So the second most important challenge that we come across in several conversations with our customers is that can we, how do I kind of improve the time to value when I take on the Zero Trust journey? So for example, now that I have determined that the security coverage and the tools required for protection, so these are the ones that are important, which standard should I adhere to? Should it be NIST? Should it be the CISA, DoD standards? So how much of re-architecture should I plan for, given the limited budget and the pressure to deliver on all these objectives, right? And while doing so, how much of these will impact the user experience? So that's the third most important challenge. User experience is at the core of any security strategy, not just limited to Zero Trust. So will there be many MFA notifications for the end users? Will there be too many password resets? Will there be too many account lockouts that the IT teams have to deal with so many tickets? And will there be alert fatigue for the SOC teams in addition to the limited security context that they have been getting so far? So all of these challenges point more towards the need for having a frictionless layered defense strategy when planning the Zero Trust journey. So how do we get there? Well, to have the broadest security coverage, the fastest time to value, and the most frictionless user experience, organizations should choose the platform first that suits their needs. That platform choice should apply to the current situation, the current requirements, and also kind of scale up to the future, right? And a platform that has the foundational elements of Zero Trust, like the endpoint, the identity protection, the cloud security, and data protection, that is critical for choosing the platform. To start off with, getting the endpoint security and identity protection sorted out will be the best foot forward in any Zero Trust journey, because these are the two primary elements that most of the adversaries target, and it makes it even more easier for the adversaries to fast track their initiatives within the organization with compromised credentials in addition to the compromised endpoints, right? So for continuous protection and risk assessment, it's important to have behavior analytics in place. And this is also recommended by many or most of the Zero Trust frameworks, including the widely adopted the NIST 800-207 framework. And with the foundational elements protected and the behavior signals in place, the platform should leverage the telemetry to provide the security context across these different domains, the different domains being the endpoint, identity, and so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, what does this all mean? For example, a security incident originating from a specific endpoint and moving laterally using valid compromised credentials should provide the right security context to the SOC teams for them to kind of identify the specific security incident and also connect the dots and automate security to stop breaches. So as I mentioned multiple times, Zero Trust is a journey, right? So it is a journey and it's going to take time. So you have to be prepared for that. I'm sure we are coming across several vendors and organizations that say, okay, you take my tool, you take my product, and you will achieve Zero Trust, but it is a journey that is going to take time. That's the hard reality. So how do I kind of plan on the zero trust maturity journey. So with maximum security coverage in mind, ideally your organization should be aiming to be on the top right in this graph. That is with maximum protection and maximum adoption throughout the organization, and with the tools and the technology that they already have invested in, right? But don't get fixated on completely fulfilling the zero trust pillars, so much so that you're unable to make a decision on what to buy next to further the zero trust journey, right? It's important to do an internal assessment for the technology that aligns with your zero trust requirements and the existing capabilities. So things like you need to analyze the gaps against the zero trust capabilities by the different pillars. The pillars, of course, are the endpoint identity to start off with, and then moving to the clouds and data protection, so on and so forth. And also, it's important to assess the internal maturity levels. And then the important thing comes up, the prioritizing changes based on the risk to the organization. Where are you most vulnerable? And also determining what are the low-hanging fruits. So what do you have right now that you can leverage and kind of take on this journey? So going ahead, as a first step in the journey, you need visibility, specifically into the attack path, right? With all those endpoints, identities, the identity stores, the workloads, the cloud workloads, and data in place, it's important to see the adversary as they are moving or progressing inside your organization, and unravel the entire attack path as it moves across these entities, right? So as mentioned earlier, the endpoints could be managed by you, your organization, or unmanaged. Could be a device from the work from home employees, or could be from contractors, right? Also, you have these multi-cloud workloads and applications, and more importantly, your users could be accessing these resources from multi-directory identity stores. So it could be your Microsoft AD, your Azure AD, or from the SSO solutions that you may have in place, right? And these identities could be privileged, they could be service accounts, and so on and so forth. So understanding all of these as a single source of truth is most important. Essentially, in short, get visibility everywhere to start off with. So the next step is to mitigate threats in real time. You need high fidelity automation. Now that you have an understanding of your threat landscape, right, from the previous step, the attack path visibility, and what the entities are up to, detecting and stopping breaches in real time is critical in your zero trust journey. Again, aligning with the zero trust framework, like a standard framework like the NIST, you should be able to incorporate behavior, risks, and segmentation. The segmentation could be network segmentation, the micro segmentation, the identity segmentation, whichever is applicable, whichever could be the low-hanging fruit that you have, and implementing these to reduce the blast radius effectively. So in many zero trust frameworks, you would have come across these policy decision points. So the policy decision points could be enriched with telemetry from the various entities or the zero trust elements, like I mentioned, like the devices and identities, and so on and so forth. And they will also consume the inbuilt threat intel or data from external sources to improve the security context. At the end of the day, it's a mix of the native signals that is available within your environment, and also from the other tools that you may already have implemented in your organization, or that you have integrated with based on your partner ecosystem, right? So you should be able to consume all of these signals so that there are no gaps within the system. So once you have this, the third step is to optimize the whole thing. So in the previous step, you benefit from zero trust if you're able to apply the policies automatically and accurately based on security context and the threat intel and the telemetry and the behavior and signals and so on and so forth. So it's important to optimize the user experience as well with risk-based conditional access. You don't want to challenge your user every time the user wants to genuinely access an application to do his work, right? It has to be based on the changing risks. If there is a sudden increase in the risk score, you should be challenging the user, or if it is coming from a location anomaly, like from a different country that the user is not supposed to be in, or from a blacklisted IP. So I'm just quoting the a finite list of signals that you could look at, but it could be hundreds of signals. So you should be able to determine and optimize the user experience based on these various signals as and when it happens. So why is this important? Possibilities are that if you challenge the users all the time, it's going to increase their fatigue. So multi-factor authentication could also be termed as multi-fatigue authentication, right? So the possibilities are that the users may accept the prompt whenever they are fatigued with too many notifications. Is high probability. So it could actually be a malicious attempt, and without even knowing that, the user could allow the access. So allowing the adversary to eventually access a critical system or server or resource or data, right? So the SOC teams will be dealing with multiple such incidents of users inadvertently allowing these accesses or trying to separate suspicious movements from genuine ones, and so on and so forth. So in the optimization phase, the goal is to improve the overall user experience, improve detection and response times, and also increase security coverage to protect your legacy systems, tools, and managed devices. So in summary, it's important to define clear goals to achieve consistent and continuous security for Zero Trust. So it's important to get the foundational elements in place. Most importantly, modernize identity, as a majority of cyber threats, including modern attacks like ransomware and supply chain threats, are because of compromised valid credentials. Also, consistently modernize the security stack in your layered defense strategy. Leverage the power of the cloud, consolidate tools and technology to minimize operational complexity. So you have a unified console, or you have fewer consoles to deal with. That's going to improve your efficiency, the SOC team efficiency, improve the mean time to detect and respond to threats in a timely manner. And also, you should be able to speed up tasks and improve security efficacy with AI and automation from the platform. So choosing the platform, I'm just trying to reiterate, is critical. And the usage of AI and automation and with the power of the platform is especially valuable to deal with skill gaps. So if you consider probably a standard Zero Trust framework, for example, the NIST 80207 Zero Trust framework with policy addition point and policy enforcement points, right? If the subject wants to access the enterprise resource, the policy addition point in the cloud can decide and enforce policies across these foundational elements. So this, while constantly being enriched with telemetry, both natively and also by consuming the signals from your partner ecosystem, this will be providing the policy addition point with rich data, with different signals and the risk score, which is dynamic and real time. And most importantly, will be providing the SOC teams or providing the automation with the much required context to apply the right controls at the right time. In short, you should aim to enable frictionless layered defense for your organization with Zero Trust. So this provides a very high level view of what you could envision with Zero Trust, where you could start off with Zero Trust, proceed, and what could be your ultimate aim or goal or the metrics that you want to define with Zero Trust. But I would say this just gives a basic overview of the important foundational items that are required for Zero Trust. And I would encourage you to reach out to me if you have questions or if you want to understand how CrowdStrike can help with strengthening the identity security posture when you are modernizing your identity security strategy, or if you want to further understand what the other foundational elements how the other foundational elements can be strengthened with CrowdStrike, and to also understand the power of the CrowdStrike platform in kind of protecting the foundational Zero Trust elements and also furthering your Zero Trust journey. So all in all, it has been a wonderful opportunity to be with you all, explaining Zero Trust, what you should consider, what are the challenges, and how to get started with the journey. So I'll be more than happy to answer any questions from all. Thank you.
All right, great presentation. Thank you so much. We've got a poll question I just brought up for the audience that says, what additional information would you like about the CrowdStrike solution? And we want to get your feedback on this one. Narendran is here answering questions electronically, so keep those good questions coming. Don't forget about our best question prize as well. I see lots of great questions coming in for the CrowdStrike team. So if you have a question on your mind about CrowdStrike, now's the time to get it in. That was a really cool presentation from CrowdStrike. Really appreciate that. Don't forget about the handouts tab as well. Right there, number 5 on the list is CrowdStrike's white paper on the top reasons to add Falcon Identity Threat Protection to your cyber defense portfolio now. So make sure that you download that PDF and check it out after the event. All right, thank you to everyone who's responding there to the poll. Again, we want to get your feedback on that. It's very important for all of our expert presenters to hear, what's the next step you'd like to take, what additional information you would like. And I'll leave that up to give everyone time to answer while I announce our next set of prize winners. We've got another Amazon $300 gift card, this one going to Rudolph Rojas from Washington, D.C. Congratulations. And our next Apple iPhone 14 Plus, this is going to Chelsea McCrary from Georgia. Congratulations, Chelsea McCrary from Georgia. Still another gift card, another iPhone to give out after our next presentation on the MegaCast today. And with that, it's time to move on and introduce you to our next presenter. I'm excited now to welcome David Higgins, who's a Senior Director in the Field Technology Office at CyberArk. Hey, David, thanks for being on.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Well, we're excited to hear what y'all are doing at CyberArk around Zero Trust security, so take it away.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So let me just progress here to the next slide, which is thwarting me at this point in time. Okay, always the case that technology undermines me a little bit. I'm trying to progress the slides, but it's not actually clicking next for me.
Go ahead and try pushing refresh on your web browser. Just make sure it's not lost a connection there. This is how the audience knows this is truly a live event.
Exactly. This one's definitely, yeah, exactly right. It's,
there we go. I see this advanced.
There we go. There we go. Just give it a little, the classic restart, as you said. So,
that's right.
Brilliant. Thank you for the introduction. Apologies there for losing a couple of minutes on the session. But exactly, I want to give you a view from the CyberArk perspective. Of course, it's going to have an identity security angle for those that know CyberArk. But what I wanted to kind of start with is I guess a little bit of a level set and kind of why we're here, right? Which from a zero trust perspective, and as I kind of play through this, none of this is going to be groundbreaking information for you, but here we are in 2023. The number of attacks isn't going down; it's going up. The way we consume technology, of course, is changing. The way our employees work is changing, and these attacks are still playing out, right? Which is there is some form of malicious actor, whether they be internal or external. Predominantly external is the concern. They make an initial intrusion, and then they go through the cyclic process of harvesting credentials, using those harvested credentials to perform lateral or vertical movements, so moving sideways or upwards in your network architecture, and then always continually looking to elevate their privileges to ultimately execute on their objective. And that objective, of course, could be shut down of service, stealing data, whatever it may be. That's gonna vary, of course, depending on who the threat actor is, and of course what you do as an organization. Again, as I say, nothing kind of groundbreaking here, but I kind of wanted to lay this theme in terms of, well, the driving force behind zero trust is many things, but of course it's ultimately to protect our organizations. And as we look at this high-level attack chain, ultimately there's kind of three things that we need to be doing to break this cycle. The idea is not necessarily to say we're going to stop all attacks, because as many of you all know, there's kind of an assume breach mindset with zero trust. We have to assume that our perimeter will be breached, because of course it's not what it once was. The way we work, where our data is, where our services are continually changing and may not be in our remit. There's kind of an assume breach mindset with zero trust. We have to assume the attack is already in. So now the next step is about cyber resilience. How do we stop the attackers moving through our environment so easily? How do we prevent credential theft? Stop that lateral and vertical movement, limit their ability to abuse privileged access and far-reaching access, to ultimately constrain and confine the attack, so that actually has to become noisier and noisier in terms of the techniques that they use. So we give ourselves the greatest possible chance at detecting them as early as possible. So when we kind of then pull this out and look at, as I say, I'm going to bring in identity security angles to this conversation, because, of course, if you look at the implementation pillars, I've grabbed this from CISA implementation pillars, and I've highlighted identity, because, of course, as hopefully, as you're all aware, as we talk zero trust, there's many aspects that we need to pull in to embrace this mindset. For me, I'm interested, and I look at the broad identity types that you have in an environment on the left-hand side, and of course the differing resources that they'll want to access. And the pieces in the middle you've probably heard of many times, which is, well, look, with a zero trust mindset, we need to remove implicit trust, right? Never trust, always verify. We need to enforce the principle of least privilege, so all those different identity types, as they request access to differing resources on the right side, well, we need to do that with the principle of least privilege, and continually monitor and feed that back. It should be a cyclic process. Let's monitor what they're doing, where did the user previously log in from, what device were they previously on, use that information for subsequent authentication and authorization decisions. And this is obviously kind of high level, but I think as we talk about the kind of the title of the MegaCast session, right, Zero Trust Theory, Truth versus Fiction, I'm not necessarily going to call out truth or fiction here, but I'm going to call out a challenge, which is all of this is straightforward, right? It's some assumptions, I think, when you look at all of these high-level zero trust recommendations. And I think some of the challenges are posed in these two questions that I've put here, which is your technology stack. When there's a recommendation to move to a passwordless world and move to a position where we've got MFA for everything, well, that there's an assumption there that your technology stack is 100% modern and supports the latest and greatest authentication methods. But how many of you obviously have applications that you've built or consume that don't do that? That still rely on username, password, or key-based authentication. And of course, the other challenge is, as we look at those different identity types, they're accessing a lot of varied resources, and they have different expectations. They're using different access methods. We can't necessarily secure all access universally. And I want to dive into those points a little bit to provide some context, and then really move into some use cases about zero trust and where CyberArk fits into the mix. So the next slide is still relatively high level, and really what we're talking about here is building on those two questions, which is, well, can we apply controls universally? Well, the answer is we couldn't. As you look at this this slide, essentially what we're saying is you've got lots of different access types, and they all pose different levels of risk to you as an organization, and that's a standard risk discussion. The likelihood of being targeted, the impact if compromised. Your cloud administrator is, of course, going to be to the far right of that access matrix. They're very high risk. They're likely to be targeted and hugely impactful if compromised. So David or Higgins logging into an HR system to request some vacation time, well, that's an access model that we do want to secure. We do want to apply some controls, but it's not really the same level of risk, and therefore we're not necessarily going to apply the same level of controls. And that's the two axes that you see here. But as I look at different identity types that need to access your resources, there's two elements here that are going to restrict and constrain things a little bit. One is something that we call the expectation of constraint. And what do I mean by expectation of constraint? Well, this is what is the user expecting in terms of the level of control that they may go through. And that expectation of constraint is going to vary depending on department. Your IT administrators, your technical staff probably expect more controls for when they're doing the day-to-day job. They say someone in the marketing or HR team. But then also expectation of constraint is going to vary depending on culture. If you're in defense or security or government, your users just naturally probably expect more controls because of the nature of the organization. Versus say if you're in construction or education, they probably expect less controls than if someone, of course, working in the defense sector. The other thing that's going to constrict what we can do from a controls perspective is what we kind of alluded to in the previous slide, which is your technology stack. Does it have some limitations that we can't do some of the things that's being advised when we talk about zero trust? You know, this kind of passwordless, least privilege model. Sometimes the technology stack is old, and it's, you know, many organizations, it's kind of, well, that's not broke, let's not try and fix it. It's doing what it's doing. You don't really want to be playing with that particular application at this point in time. So from a summary perspective of this kind of ramble that I've gone on here, what I'm trying to say is the most secure is, of course, never the most appropriate. We are always at security, and again, I'm probably teaching you to suck eggs a little bit here, so apologies, but it's, you know, security enabler is all about striking that right balance, and it's no different when we talk about zero trust. We've got to find the right model when it comes to securing access requests from our subjects, depending on the resources that they're going to. And you hear me using the term subjects and resources because actually I'm listing those out from the NIST special publication that talks, of course, about embracing zero trust as an approach. And naturally in that, it of course, there's different organizations will have to go about this in different ways because of some of the things that I've just shared. So let me bring this all back to zero trust. And I'll start with a very cool drawing that I've done of a diagram listed from the NIST special publication 80-207. And you see here something that you've probably seen many times before. And I just want to put some use cases wrapped around this because I think it's great for us to talk about this at a high level. But we kind of need to move into this in two areas. From my perspective, when we think about identity and how we think about it at CyberArk. So firstly, of course, there is the subject that needs to request access to a resource. And what we're talking about, of course, is having a policy enforcement point that delivers that access, which is backed up by an engine and an administrator of making the decision as to whether that access should be granted and how it should be granted. We're going to unpick that a little bit. Two things I want to call out here. I love the fact they use the term subject, not identities, not users. Because, of course, when we're embracing zero trust, you know, talking about the truth with fiction here, we're not just talking about interactive sessions by human users. We have to be very much aware that actually there's a lot of machine-to-machine communication taking place. And we need to secure those automated processes as much as we do for that, you know, end user logging into a Office 365 service or logging into a database application. The other thing I want to call out is where identity actually plays a role. It's not simply just in that middle part about delivering the access as and when a user requests it, but of course at the very beginning we need to authenticate those subjects. When it's a human user, they're going to be operating on a device, and there's a whole privilege discussion about what entitlements should we actually give users on the workstation. If we're embracing zero trust, nobody should be running on their workstation with admin rights because we're taking that esteem breach mindset. And if someone's executing malicious executables with admin rights, well, that's a step up for the attacker. right? They're already where they want to be. On the right-hand side, we've got a whole identity discussion here about provisioning of identities, defining them appropriately, enforcing the right level of access right on the differing resources. And then, of course, there's the policy enforcement point and decision point. And the point I'm raising here on this slide is someone's going to build that. Someone's going to configure that. Someone's going to maintain it. And you may be looking to think about doing that automatically. Brilliant. You may have a team of users who are going to do that. My point here is there are identity subjects who are going to have access into your zero trust network control layer to build it, configure it, maintain it. So this naturally, that piece in the middle naturally starts to become a critical zero kind of area for you, right? That is logically where if we all move to zero trust network and topology in our environments, well, that's naturally where attackers are going to start focusing their attention. If they can undermine your enforcement point, undermine your decision point, then that's logically what they're going to do, because that's just what history tells us. We enforce security controls, and attackers look to find ways and means to undermine and circumvent them. And I'm going to touch on all these different things as I now bring up some use cases. So I want to take this high-level kind of position and say, well, let's put it into some real-world scenarios. Where can the CyberArk Identity Security Suite help out when we look at this model? So let's move to a kind of a scenario that's going to affect any of you who are embracing platform infrastructure as a service, which is the individuals administrating your cloud-based environment. So this is from a subject perspective, we're talking about a human user, and they'll be operating from a workstation on the assumption, of course, that one of your own employees. Third-party access is something we can help with, but I'm not covering on this use case. But I'm making an assumption here, this is someone that is part of your organization, it's a direct employee of your organization. And they need access to the resource. And the resource in this case is a cloud console or perhaps even an API that they're going to do and interact with through a CLI session. What we have then is, well, what can we do? What do we want to do to secure this access? Well, the key thing is we want to move to a position of zero standing privileges for these users, because we're taking that assume breach mindset. So if these users are actually logging into cloud environments, we don't want their identity sitting with persistent admin rights and persistent privileges. We've got to assume an attacker is going to go after their identity, and if they do, and if we have zero standing privileges, well, we've done that objective of cyber resilience. We're restricting the attack. We're making it more difficult for the attacker to exploit standing in excessive permissions. So this is something we're doing in our secure cloud access solution, which is that end user, after going through the relevant checks on the subject side, so strong, adaptive, multi-factor authentication. The adaptive element brings in context, by the way, right, so where they are in the world, what device they're using, etc. Securing their endpoint, so making sure this user is working in a secured environment, so they're not running with admin permissions. We're protecting credentials on the device. We're enforcing and managing which applications can run. There's a third bullet point there, less about security, more about that expectation of constraint. Cloud administrators have a pretty low expectation of constraint. You cut them and they bleed the word cloud native. They want to work in a native way with very little restrictions. So native user experience is important, something that we've worked on as well with a secure cloud access solution. And essentially what happens in this model to deliver a zero trust access into the cloud environment, users fire up a native user experience, request short-lived access for a particular role. That could be something that's predefined in a role-based access policy, or something could be ad hoc, which is more the direction of travel that we see for identity-based access requests, because there's too many combinations to kind of think up in advance. Make the request, elevate it on the fly, leveraging cloud-native integration to do that, monitoring what they do, because we can use that information to identify threats as we move forward, and at the end of the session, revoke that access. So striking that balance, expectation of constraint, but delivering the security controls that are going to move us towards that position of zero standing privileges, and securing this new environment that we're embracing, whether you're lifting, shifting workloads or building new in that environment. Now, some of you may not be in the cloud. Some of you may be starting that journey. So let's change tact a little bit, and let's say, well, let's forget whether we have a workload running in the cloud, on-premise, or virtualized. Let's talk about, well, you're running some kind of service application. It's sitting on top of infrastructure. And of course, we've got infrastructure administrators who are responsible for managing those. If you're thinking, well, we do this all autonomously, brilliant. We're going to cover that in the third use case, or at least we're going to cover automation in the third use case. But here I'm talking about someone who needs to log on to a box to fix something. And again, what we want to be moving towards is, again, that position of zero standing privilege and move to a position where there are no standing admin rights. Because again, if we have more identities, which have more standing permissions, then we have a larger attack there. We have more things for an attacker to go after. So in this workflow, same thing, strong adaptive multi-factor authentication with a protected workstation. The policy enforcement point in this case is a technology we call dynamic privileged access. And what dynamic privileged access does is it makes a decision based on an attribute-based policy as to whether that requesting end user should have access to that particular infrastructure node. And if it should, it creates the privilege on the fly and revokes it afterwards. A position of zero standing privileges. So again, what we're doing is shrinking the attack surface, putting our environment more in line with the principles of zero trust because of that attack chain that I outlined at the very, very start. So let's just move through two other use cases quickly with time in mind. And I mentioned about automation because, as I say, I really like the fact that NIST used the term subject because it means we're not just talking about users and human users and interactive sessions. We've got to think about the automated processes. And look, there's not enough hours in the day for me to give you all the different examples of automation. So I went for robotic process automation, RPA for short. And this is another example. So how do we take all that stuff that we've been hearing about we need to do with zero trust and apply it to an automated bot? So this is something that we do to enforce controls, to enforce an enforcement point, to use the word enforce too many times, to have a decision point, but still do it for a non-human process. And we do this through our secrets management technology. The idea is that that bot, wherever it's running, whether it's an appliance, whether it's SaaS, etc., we want to make sure, again, that it doesn't have, we're taking that assume breach mindset. Right. So we don't want to make sure it's got any hard-coded credentials, any keys or secrets in configuration files. We want to make sure that if anyone gets in that appliance and service, that there's no keys to our kingdom residing there. Instead, when the bot needs access to a resource, and of course, the examples that robotic process automation could access are very, very broad. I've kept the resources all listed there. They make a request to the secrets management solution and say, hey, look, I need access to this resource, and this is who I am. And so then we do a form of authentication for a non-human. Authenticate, maybe it's based on tokens, certificates, different ways, attributes of the bot itself, to make a decision as to whether that bot should have access to the target resource. Deliver it as secret, it uses it, gets the access it needs, that automated process is invoked, but under the covers, privileged account management is at play, so that secret that it got hold of, it's short-lived. It's revoked afterwards, it's rotated afterwards, and we reinforce our policy enforcement point. So taking, we're moving those levers of controls, of risk, technology constraint, expectation of constraint, and applying these to many different use cases. And that was kind of what I wanted to pick a little bit with a kind of truth and fiction is, what's the realistic world scenario here? And what I'm really moving towards, and I'll give you one final example, because I think this is one that challenges a lot of people when they look at some of the guidance around zero trust, which is, well, I've got something that's non-integrated. It's legacy. And you could take the word app there and change it to server or workstation or whatever. But that's where we can't do some of the fancy stuff that, we're being advised to do. What do we do in those scenarios? Well, again, we're tweaking our levers here, right? We're trying to apply the right level of controls, but we have that expectation of constraint and that technology constraint to bear in mind. So from the end user side, we can do all the stuff that we wanted to do. But in this use case, the end user wants to access, let's say it's a third-party application that a particular department is signed up to. It's critical to what they do day to day, but the authentication to that app is still username and password. I know, shock horror, that could still be happening. I'm sure many of you can think of multiple examples where that's still the case. We've got to secure it. We've got to secure it with a zero trust mindset, but we can't do some of the new, we can't deliver a kind of an adaptive multi-factor authentication process into that resource. So what can we do? So in this scenario, we would recommend our workforce password management solution, within which all the credentials needed by those legacy applications would be under lock and key and being managed. So nobody on the left-hand side knows them, because we don't want end users seeing them, because we're taking an assume breach mindset. we're assuming their workstation could be compromised. And instead, what happens is the user makes a request to the Workforce Password Management solution, says, hey, I need to log into this particular resource. And then we can kind of simulate a single sign-on process. We'll log them in to that resource. We'll inject the credential into that application GUI for them. So they don't need to see it. They don't need to use it. They can share it amongst their team, and we'll still get full auditing about who's using it. But we're delivering a form of enforcement point. And that's kind of what I wanted to get through for today is those enforcement points will kind of vary massively depending on who the users are and the technology stack that's applied. And so what this really means from an identity perspective is that you need a platform that's able to offer you all the different use cases so you don't have multiple different services doing overlapping things, all with different outputs from an audit perspective. And that's kind of our view here at CyberArk is with our identity security platform. Again, the slide's relatively high level here, but our identity security platform is all about, well, look, can we protect that originating, sorry, the text got condensed, that originating identity on the left-hand side, the user making the request, securely authenticate them, secure their workstation so they're not running with admin rights. Have their journey start by making a request into the CyberArk Identity Security Platform. But then where they're going, they'll go through different services. They'll go through different technology processes because there's huge different resources there. Applying controls in conjunction with that level of risk. And of course, making sure we're doing the right level of monitoring because that's something we should be using for subsequent access decisions. So that's everything what I wanted to cover here. I hope that made sense. I hope I didn't talk too quickly because I do have a tendency to do that. But really at this point, opportunity to see if there's any questions that have come in, anything I can answer in terms of a lot of the things I just covered there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great presentation, David. We do have some questions for you. While we take our audience questions, I'm just going to bring up this poll for everyone out there that says, what additional information would you like about the CyberArk solution? And we do want to get your feedback on that. So make sure you select one or multiple options on that poll. Let's see, David, I'll go ahead and start with this question. They're asking, they say there were three things you mentioned we need to do. One was prevent lateral movement, but you mainly talked about identity controls, not network-related ones. Surely microsegmentation is a consideration here too. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, as I kind of mentioned, and great question. Thanks for calling me out on it. You know, there's implementation pillars are called out. There's multiple things we need to consider. And really with lateral movement, to summarize it very simply, there's two things the attacker needs. They need a network route for sure from their intrusion point, and they need an identity. And we can use both of those as a form of perimeter. And you'll hear many organizations talk about identity as the new perimeter. And there's a lot of truth in that because if we can restrict where identities go and we can really truly move to position of least privilege, then on the assumption our identity is compromised, we can make it very difficult for an attacker to shift and move to their endpoints. But of course, security is a team game, and it's all about, you know, multiple defense and depth type approach to secure this. But yeah, great question.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, thanks for clarifying on that. Let's see, lots of great questions coming in. Another good one. They say, I'm interested to know more about removing standing admin access that you gave in the examples. Where can I find more? Is this something you do?
Gotcha, absolutely. So yeah, it's two areas that we operate in. So on the privileged access side, which is probably where many of you know CyberArk very well, something that we're doing a lot these days is to say, well, rather than give someone access of an admin account that's already been predefined and already has all these ranging of privileged permissions, our dynamic privileged access solution actually creates short-lived privileged access and allows you to move to a position of zero standing privileges. And our endpoint privilege management solution, it's all about doing the same thing, but on your workstation. So think developers, your executives, IT administrators told you, oh, I need admin rights on my workstation. You can't take that away. Puts them in a very high-risk category. Our endpoint privilege management solution means that no one in your organization needs admin rights. So if they do click the wrong link, they do open the wrong attachment, it's not being executed with those admin permissions, we've put ourselves in a great position to, again, contain the attack and allow ourselves to, to detect the attacker as quickly as possible.
Yeah, excellent. That sounds like it could help a lot of folks out there to be more secure. Next question, how do you help where I can't put MFA on a target system?
Yeah. something I was mentioning a lot, right? So I guess, again, it depends on the different use cases. But if you take, say, what a lot of our customers have been doing over the years, which is for regulation reasons, say, we need to put MFA on this particular target. If it doesn't support it, what can we do? Well, we can use a policy enforcement point. We could use technology like privileged access management or a workforce password management solution to say, well, look, we'll take the credential away from the user that's needed to access that legacy system that doesn't support MFA. So now they have to come to CyberArk to get the access because they no longer have the keys to the kingdom. And where we can do is we can shift where the MFA takes place. The MFA now takes place as they access CyberArk. So once we've validated that user and we've made sure that they are really who they say they are, and they are able to access what they're requesting access to, then we'll deliver that access. So what we do in those scenarios is we just shift where the MFA takes place because of those technology constraints I was mentioning before.
Excellent. Solving problems right and left. Another question here. You mentioned about expectation of constraint. Can you explain what you mean by this?
Yes, it's that classic thing in security, right? Which is the most secure thing we could probably do with our systems is to turn them off. Then they're not hackable, right? But then they're not usable. So we need to be realistic, and we need to strike the right balance between operational efficiency and the most secure environment. The expectation of constraint is what the end user themselves expect really to go through to do the particular task they're performing. And as mentioned before, there's different kind of examples here. Think of your technology teams. They probably have a high expectation of constraint. They know what they're doing is pretty high privilege, so they expect to go through a few more hoops than if they are just accessing their Outlook. And also, if you're in different industry sectors, your users probably, because of the culture of your organization, also have differing levels of expectation of constraint. I mentioned if you're working in government or defense, your users naturally have a heightened awareness of security and therefore probably expect to go through some more hoops to access systems. And that's kind of what we mean by expectation of constraint, is understanding your culture and your end user to understand really what they're expecting from a controls perspective. Because security is a team game. I mentioned that before on a technology stack, but also from a community perspective, right? We're ultimately trying to secure our organization so we can all work together. So yeah, that's kind of what I mean by expectation of constraint.
Got it. Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Well, David, I'm afraid we're running out of time here in our live Q&A session.
No problem.
What should folks do to get started with CyberArk?
So we should be, I think we're making available a link just to give you a bit more intel on where CyberArk fits into the whole Zero Trust story. So definitely check that out to find some more information. And, once you're there, you'll be on our website. So any other questions, feel free to make contact through us that way. We'd love to hear from you.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks so much, David, for a great presentation.
Thank you.
And, of course, thank you to CyberArk for supporting the MegaCast. Don't forget about the Handouts tab right there. You'll find a link, number 6. Click on that. That'll take you to the CyberArk Zero Trust as a Service solution. There's a resource there you can download, as well as a link to request a demo for yourself. So make sure that you check that out before you go. And with that, I will now announce our final set of prize winners here, starting off with another Amazon $300 gift card, this one going to Tegan Dowman from Wisconsin, and our final grand prize for another iPhone 14 Plus, this going to Brian Teeter from Indiana. Congratulations to all the prize winners on the MegaCast today. Now, before we go, I just want to remind everyone, after the event, you'll be automatically redirected to our Refer a Friend page, where you can refer a coworker to Actual Tech Media's online events, and you both could win an Amazon $300 gift card. So watch out for that as soon as we end the event here. It's another great way to be entered into a prize drawing. I want to give a big thank you, of course, to all of the sponsors on the MegaCast today, and another big thank you to all of our attendees. If you are a future presenter on the MegaCast or EcoCast, or you want to be a future sponsor, reach out to us at connect@actualtechmedia.com. And I hope to see you on our next event happening next Wednesday. This is another MegaCast. It's our Technology and Security Innovations Showcase with Rubrik and Tanium. Wednesday, August 9th at 12 o'clock Eastern. Look for an invitation to that in your email inbox. Thanks so much for joining us on the MegaCast. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope you have a great day. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.